Welcome to my channel. Here, we share inspiring stories of brave and strong people. Maybe you'll see yourself or someone you know in these stories. Thank you for watching. The men who knocked on Eli Warren's door were polite at first, clean-cut, well-dressed, their smiles sharp enough to cut steel. They came with an offer: sell his land and leave, or face the consequences. But Eli didn't flinch. He'd seen men like them before. In jungles, deserts, and cities where danger wore many faces. These men thought they could scare him, force him to abandon his home like so many others in the valley. They had no idea the man they'd threatened had once been a legend. A ghost who could dismantle entire operations before they even began. As the cartel tightened its grip on the valley, Eli prepared for battle, not with words, but with traps, precision, and the team he swore he'd never call again. Drop a comment and share where you're joining us from. If stories like this resonate with you, hit subscribe so you don't miss our next inspiring journey coming tomorrow. Eli Warren stood on the edge of his property just as the sun peeked over the mountains, casting long shadows across the valley. Ranger, his German shepherd, sat alert by his side, ears twitching at every faint sound. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and the faint, metallic tang of soil freshly tilled the day before. Eli's calloused hands rested on the wooden fence as his sharp eyes scanned the horizon. The quiet was comforting, familiar even. But something felt off. His gaze dropped to the dirt road leading to his property. A faint set of tire tracks, fresh and unmistakably out of place, carved a path through the otherwise untouched ground. The tread was deep, likely from a heavy truck, and it hadn't been there yesterday. Eli crouched, brushing his fingers lightly against the tracks. He muttered under his breath, "Someone's been here." Ranger growled softly, his nose twitching as he sniffed the ground. "You smell that too?" "Huh," Eli said, giving the dog a reassuring pat. The tracks stretched out toward the main road, disappearing into the thick pine trees. Eli stood slowly, his mind already piecing together the possibilities. It wasn't unusual to see the occasional vehicle from a neighboring farm, but these tracks weren't from anyone he recognized. Whoever had been here wasn't local. Eli continued his morning routine, walking the perimeter of his farm with Ranger trotting alongside. The property sprawled over 50 acres, a mix of rolling fields and dense forest. For years, it had been his sanctuary, a quiet retreat where he could leave behind the chaos of his former life. Now, that peace seemed fragile, as though the weight of something unwelcome hung just beyond the tree line. The valley itself was as picturesque as they came, a place where mornings were punctuated by the calls of red-tailed hawks and evenings by the hum of crickets. Most of the residents were long-time locals, their families having settled here generations ago. It was the kind of place where people looked out for one another. But lately, things had begun to change. At the edge of the field, Maya Clark stood waving, her blonde hair catching the early light. Eli raised a hand in greeting and adjusted his stride to meet her. Maya was in her early 40s, sharp-eyed and quick-witted, running her family's farm on the next property over. She was one of the few people Eli trusted to speak her mind without dressing it up. "Morning, Eli," she said, her voice carrying a note of urgency. "You notice anything strange around here lately?" "Strange how?" Eli replied, keeping his tone even. Maya glanced over her shoulder, as if expecting someone to appear from the woods. "The Hendersons. They up and sold their farm last week. Didn't tell anyone they were leaving. Just packed up and disappeared. Now there are strangers poking around their old place. Not the friendly kind. Either." Eli nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. You talked to them? Tried to, Maya said, folding her arms. They didn't say much. Just something about getting a deal they couldn't refuse. But it doesn't sit right with me. They've lived here longer than I have. Why sell out of the blue like that? Eli didn't respond immediately. Instead, he let his eyes drift back toward the direction of the Henderson property. It was a good 3 miles down the valley, but close enough to feel like trouble. What did these strangers look like? He finally asked. Black SUVs. Tinted windows, Maya said. Couple of guys in suits. But they didn't look like businessmen. More like they were sizing up the place. Eli gave a small nod, his thoughts already racing. I'll keep an eye out, he said simply. Maya hesitated, clearly wanting to press the issue. Eli, you've been around. You know what's happening here, don't you? He met her gaze but didn't answer directly. If there's something to handle, I'll handle it. Maya frowned but didn't push further. Just be careful. Okay? These people aren't the kind you want to mess with. I hear you, Eli said, watching as she turned and headed back toward her truck parked near the road. As Ranger nudged his leg, Eli crouched to scratch behind the dog's ears. Looks like we've got company. Boy, he murmured. The day passed uneventfully, but the feeling of unease lingered. Eli moved through his routine methodically, checking the irrigation lines, repairing a section of fencing, and ensuring the livestock were fed. Yet his mind kept drifting back to the tracks and Maya's words. The valley had always been a quiet place, untouched by the troubles of the outside world. That quiet, it seemed, was about to end. As the sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Eli stood on his porch, sipping black coffee from a chipped mug. Ranger lay at his feet, dozing lightly but with his ears twitching at every faint sound. In the distance, the faint hum of an engine echoed through the stillness. Eli's grip tightened on the mug. He didn't need to see the vehicle to know it didn't belong. He waited until the sound faded before stepping inside. In the barn, hidden beneath a stack of hay bales, was a locked chest. Eli knelt, turning the key with practiced ease. Inside was a modest collection of tools that spoke to a life far removed from farming: a tactical flashlight, a knife with a serrated edge, and a set of radios. His fingers brushed against the cold steel of a pistol. He didn't linger long. Closing the chest, he stood and let out a slow breath. Guess we'll see how this plays out, he said softly. The words meant more for himself than Ranger. The quiet of the valley was his home, his sanctuary. But he knew all too well how quickly quiet could turn to chaos. For now, though, he would wait and watch. If trouble came knocking, it would find him ready. Eli Warren leaned against the post of his porch as the last rays of daylight faded into dusk. The quiet hum of insects filled the air, but his attention was fixed on the approaching vehicle. Headlights cut through the growing darkness, and the unmistakable crunch of tires on gravel echoed up the drive. Ranger, lying at his feet, perked his ears and let out a low growl. Eli didn't move as a black SUV rolled to a stop near the barn. The doors opened in unison, and 3 men stepped out. 2 of them were dressed casually, but their rigid posture and sharp movements betrayed their experience. The 3rd man, standing slightly in front, was dressed in a tailored black suit. He adjusted his cufflinks with a practiced air, his expression calm but calculating. Eli didn't need a second glance to know this man was trouble. Evening, the man in the suit said, flashing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. His voice was smooth, almost practiced, the kind of tone meant to put someone at ease while hiding sharper intentions. Eli Warren. I presume? Eli nodded once, his face giving away nothing. That's me. And you are? The man extended a hand. But Eli didn't take it. Undeterred, the man retracted his hand and gestured to the land surrounding them. Nice place you've got here. Name's Felix Romero. My associates and I represent a group interested in acquiring property in this area. Seems like a good investment opportunity. Eli's eyes flicked to the other two men, both standing silently by the SUV. Their hands rested casually near their hips. But Eli didn't miss the bulges beneath their jackets. Felix followed his gaze and chuckled. Don't mind them. They're just here for my protection. You know how it is these days. Eli folded his arms, his tone as neutral as his expression. What do you want? Felix took a step forward, spreading his hands as if presenting a generous offer. Like I said, we're looking to buy land. I hear you've got one of the best pieces in the valley. Good soil. Plenty of water. We're prepared to make you a very attractive offer. I'm not selling, Eli said flatly. Felix's smile wavered for the briefest moment before returning. Now, Mr. Warren, I think you should reconsider. We're not just talking about money here. We're talking about security. A chance to step away from all this hard work and live comfortably. It's a win-win. I've got everything I need right here, Eli replied, his voice calm but firm. Not interested. Felix's eyes narrowed slightly, his polished demeanor cracking just enough to reveal the steel beneath. I'd hate for you to regret turning down such a generous offer. It's a dangerous world out there, Mr. Warren. Things happen. Eli's expression didn't change, but Ranger growled low in his throat, the sound carrying a quiet menace. Felix glanced at the dog, then back at Eli, his smile returning with a hint of condescension. Think about it, he said, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a business card. He placed it on the porch railing. You've got 24 hours to make up your mind. After that, well, I'd hate to see anything happen to this beautiful farm. Without waiting for a response, Felix turned and walked back to the SUV. His associates followed, their eyes lingering on Eli and Ranger before climbing into the vehicle. The SUV backed down the drive, its red taillights fading into the night. Eli picked up the business card and turned it over in his hand. The front bore only Felix's name and a phone number. He slipped it into his pocket and glanced down at Ranger. Looks like they mean business, he said softly. Underscore 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 underscore. Later that evening, Maya Clark returned to Eli's farm, her truck kicking up dust as she pulled into the yard. She stepped out, her face pale and her movements hurried. Eli, she called, walking quickly toward him. We need to talk. Eli met her halfway, his posture as steady as ever. What's going on? I just came back from town, she said, glancing around as if someone might be watching. Those men, they were at my place. Same ones you saw. They didn't say much. Just looked around and asked a few questions. But I could tell they were sizing the place up. Eli frowned but didn't interrupt as she continued. I don't like this. Eli. They're not just buying land. They're scaring people into selling. The Hendersons didn't leave because they wanted to. They left because they were scared. Scared of what? Eli asked, his voice steady but serious. Maya hesitated, her hands tightening into fists. They didn't say exactly, but I heard rumors. These men aren't just businessmen. They're part of something bigger. Organized. Dangerous. Eli's eyes darkened. His mind already racing through the implications. You're sure about this? I'm sure, she said. And I'm worried about you. They're not going to take no for an answer. Eli nodded slowly, his gaze shifting toward the distant woods. I'll be fine. Maya. Don't worry about me. You don't understand, she said, her voice rising. These people don't play fair. They'll push until you break. Eli turned back to her, his expression unreadable but firm. I've dealt with worse. Maya stared at him for a moment, searching his face for any sign of doubt. When she found none, she let out a frustrated sigh. Fine. But if you're not going to look out for yourself, at least think about the rest of us. If they take your land, the rest of the valley won't stand a chance. Eli's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. After a moment, Maya shook her head and turned back toward her truck. Just be careful, she said over her shoulder. As her taillights disappeared into the night, Eli stood alone in the yard, the weight of her words settling over him. He knew Maya was right. The valley was vulnerable, and the cartel wasn't going to stop until they had control. But they hadn't counted on him. Ranger barked sharply, breaking Eli's thoughts. He looked down at the dog, then toward the barn. Come on, boy, he said, heading inside. Time to get ready. In the barn, Eli moved quickly and quietly, pulling back a tarp to reveal a concealed compartment beneath a stack of hay bales. Inside, his past lay waiting, tactical gear, a rifle, and a radio, each item meticulously maintained. He pulled out a small flashlight and clicked it on. Its beam cutting through the darkness. Looks like the quiet life's over, he muttered, securing the rifle in his hands. Ranger wagged his tail, his eyes sharp and alert. Together, they stood in the dim light of the barn, ready for whatever came next. The early morning sun cast long shadows over the valley as Eli Warren adjusted a weathered fence post near the edge of his property. Ranger, ever vigilant, stayed close by, sniffing the air for anything unusual. The peaceful rhythm of Eli's day was interrupted by the distant rumble of a truck approaching from the main road. He paused and turned toward the sound, spotting Maya Clark's familiar red pickup winding its way up the gravel driveway. Maya parked near the barn and stepped out, her usually steady demeanor replaced by a palpable unease. She waved as she approached, but her eyes darted around, scanning the surroundings as though she expected someone to be watching. Eli noted the tension in her movements, the way her hands fidgeted with the hem of her jacket. Morning, Maya, Eli greeted, leaning casually against the fence. Something on your mind? She nodded quickly, wasting no time. Eli, I need to talk to you about something. Something serious. Eli gestured toward the porch, and the two walked side by side. Maya kept her voice low, as though the open air itself couldn't be trusted. You've noticed things have been different lately, right? Strangers showing up in the valley. People keeping quiet when you ask questions? Eli nodded but didn't respond immediately, letting her continue. It's the cartel, she said bluntly, her voice laced with frustration. They're not even trying to hide it anymore. They've been going around to everyone, Henderson's, McAllister's, even old Jim over by the creek. They're buying up land left and right. And anyone who doesn't sell, well, they get scared off. Scared how? Eli asked, his tone neutral. Maya hesitated, her eyes locking onto his. You know what I mean. Eli. Threats. Intimidation. People showing up in the middle of the night to send a message. Eli kept his expression steady. But his mind was already turning over the implications. And you? Have they come to you yet? Not directly, she admitted. But they've been watching. I've seen their cars parked near my property more than once. And yesterday, I caught one of them walking along my fence line, pretending to be lost. Eli frowned. Did you say anything to them? Of course I did, she snapped, her frustration bubbling to the surface. Told them to get off my land. But, Eli, these people, they're not like the usual troublemakers we get out here. They've got money, resources, and they don't take no for an answer. He studied her for a moment before responding. Why come to me with this? Maya? What are you expecting me to do? She looked at him like the answer should have been obvious. Because you're the only one in this valley who doesn't scare easy. Everyone else is either selling or keeping their heads down, hoping they won't be next. But you? You're different. You've always been different. Eli let the comment hang in the air, choosing his next words carefully. I appreciate the vote of confidence. But I'm just a farmer. Maya. Same as everyone else. She snorted, clearly unconvinced. Right. And I'm the Queen of England. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. Look, Eli. I don't know what your story is. And I'm not asking. But I know you're not just a farmer. You've got a way about you, how you move, how you talk. People like you don't just end up in a place like this by accident. Eli held her gaze, his expression unreadable. Let's say you're right. What exactly are you asking me to do? Keep an eye out, she said, her tone softening. You've got better instincts than anyone around here. If they come for you, and they will, I want you to be ready. I'm always ready. Eli replied evenly. Maya studied him for another moment before nodding, though she still looked uneasy. Just, promise me you'll take this seriously. They're not going to stop. Eli. Not until they have what they want. He didn't respond immediately, instead turning his gaze toward the distant hills. I'll handle it. Maya. You don't need to worry about me. That's the thing, she said, her voice quieter now. I'm not just worried about you. If they take your land, the rest of us don't stand a chance. Eli turned back to her, his jaw tightening. They won't take it. Maya nodded reluctantly, though it was clear she wasn't entirely reassured. All right. Just watch your back. Okay? I always do. She lingered for a moment, as though there was more she wanted to say, but finally turned and headed back toward her truck. Ranger barked softly as she climbed into the cab, her movements tense and hurried. Eli watched as she drove off, the dust from her tires hanging in the air long after she disappeared down the road. The rest of the day passed quietly, but Maya's words stuck with Eli. As he worked the fields and tended to the animals, he kept an ear tuned to the sounds of the valley. The chirping of birds, the rustle of leaves, the distant whine of a chainsaw, all familiar, all normal. But beneath it all was a faint tension, a feeling that something was waiting just beyond the edges of his awareness. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Eli sat on the porch with a cup of coffee in hand. Ranger lay at his feet, his ears twitching at every distant sound. Eli's gaze drifted toward the horizon, where the faint glow of headlights could be seen winding along the main road. The valley had always been a quiet place, a refuge from the noise and chaos of the outside world. But now, that quiet felt fragile, like a thin layer of ice over deep water. And Eli knew all too well how quickly it could shatter. He reached down to scratch Ranger behind the ears, his voice low and steady. Looks like it's time to dig in. Boy. Ranger wagged his tail, his sharp eyes scanning the darkness as though he understood every word. Eli took another sip of his coffee, his mind already turning over the next steps. Whatever was coming, he wouldn't let it catch him unprepared. The sound of tires crunching over gravel broke the late afternoon silence. Eli Warren stood by the barn, wiping dirt from his hands after repairing a broken gate. His gaze shifted toward the driveway as a sleek black SUV rolled into view, its polished exterior gleaming in the sunlight. Ranger stood alert at his side, a low growl rumbling in his throat. Eli's sharp eyes caught the subtle details as the vehicle came to a stop, the tinted windows, the slight sag of the rear axle suggesting reinforced armor, and the cautious precision with which it parked. The doors opened, and 3 men stepped out. 2 of them wore plain, unassuming clothes, but their movements were disciplined, their gazes sharp as they scanned the surroundings. The third man, clearly in charge, adjusted the cuffs of his tailored black suit before stepping forward with a practiced smile. "Good afternoon, Mr. Warren," the man said, his tone polished and overly friendly. "My name's Felix Romero. I believe we've got some business to discuss." Eli remained where he was, his expression unreadable as he studied the man in front of him. Felix's slick demeanor, combined with the subtle menace in his posture, made it clear he wasn't here for idle conversation. "What kind of business?" Eli asked evenly, his voice giving nothing away. Felix gestured toward the expanse of farmland surrounding them. "You've got quite the property here. Beautiful land. Prime location. My associates and I represent a group that's been acquiring land in the valley. We're prepared to make you a very generous offer." "I'm not interested," Eli said without hesitation, his tone flat. Felix's smile didn't waver, but there was a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. "Mr. Warren, I don't think you understand the opportunity here. We're offering well above market value. Enough for you to retire comfortably and never have to worry about a thing again. I've got everything I need right here," Eli replied, his stance as immovable as his tone. Felix chuckled, though it was devoid of humor. "You know, it's rare to find someone who doesn't have a price." "Admirable. Really. But let's be realistic, this valley is changing. People are moving on. And it's only a matter of time before you're surrounded by empty fields and abandoned homes. What's the point in holding on to something that's just going to lose its value?" Eli didn't respond immediately, letting the silence stretch out between them. His eyes shifted briefly to the 2 men standing near the SUV. They were pretending to be relaxed, but their alert posture and the way their hands hovered near their waists told a different story. Felix noticed his glance and gave a small, knowing smile. "Don't mind them," Felix said, his tone smooth. "They're just here for my protection. You can never be too careful these days." Eli's expression remained unchanged. "Protection from what?" Felix spread his hands in a mock display of innocence. "Oh. You know how it is. The world's full of unpredictable people. But let's not get off track. We're here to talk about your land." "I already gave you my answer," Eli said firmly. "I'm not selling." Felix's smile faltered slightly, and the polished veneer began to crack. He took a step closer, his voice lowering. "I think you're making a mistake, Mr. Warren. We're offering you a way out. A chance to avoid any complications." "Complications?" Eli repeated, his tone cold. Felix nodded, his smile returning but lacking any warmth. "You know how these things go. People who don't cooperate often find themselves regretting it. Accidents happen. Livestock gets spooked. Fences get cut. Crops go bad. It's unfortunate. But it happens. Ranger let out another low growl. Stepping closer to Eli's side. Felix glanced at the dog. Then back at Eli. Nice dog you've got there. Would be a shame if something happened to him. Eli's eyes hardened. But his voice remained calm. That a threat? Not at all. Felix said smoothly, raising his hands in a mock gesture of innocence. Just pointing out the risks of holding on to something that's better left behind. The tension hung thick in the air as Eli and Felix locked eyes. Finally, Felix pulled a business card from his pocket and placed it on the railing of the nearby porch. Take some time to think it over, he said, his tone shifting back to feigned politeness. You've got 24 hours. After that, well, let's just say I wouldn't wait too long to decide. With that, Felix turned and walked back toward the SUV. His two men following close behind. Eli didn't move, watching silently as they climbed into the vehicle. The engine roared to life, and the SUV rolled down the driveway, disappearing into the trees. Eli stood motionless for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the empty road. Finally, he reached for the business card and turned it over in his hand. It was simple, just Felix's name and a phone number. He slipped it into his pocket and glanced down at Ranger, who was still growling softly. Looks like they mean business, Eli muttered, his tone grim. The sun had begun to set by the time Eli returned to the barn. The quiet of the valley, once a source of peace, now felt heavy with the weight of impending conflict. He moved with purpose, his steps deliberate as he entered the dimly lit space. Hidden beneath a pile of old tarps and hay bales was a locked metal chest. Eli knelt and unlocked it, revealing a collection of tools that didn't belong on a farm: a tactical knife, a high-powered rifle, and a compact radio set. His hands moved over the equipment with practiced familiarity, checking each piece with meticulous care. Ranger sat nearby, his eyes following Eli's movements. The dog let out a small whine, as if sensing the shift in his owner's demeanor. Eli glanced down at him and gave a faint smile. Don't worry, boy. We'll handle it. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of a promise. Eli had faced men like Felix before, men who believed they could take what they wanted through intimidation and force. They hadn't succeeded then, and they wouldn't succeed now. As the last light of day faded, Eli stood and closed the chest, locking it securely. He placed a hand on Ranger's head, his expression calm but resolute. Let them come, he said softly. We'll be ready. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to our channel, it means so much to us. Now, let's get back to the story. Eli Warren stood in the center of his barn, surrounded by the familiar smells of hay and motor oil. Yet his mind was far from the quiet valley. The flickering light of an overhead bulb cast long shadows across the weathered beams. But Eli wasn't looking at the barn. He was looking inward, at a life he had tried to leave behind. Phantom, they had called him. A name whispered in the dark corners of the world, both as a warning and a legend. It wasn't just a call sign, it was a reputation. Eli had spent 3 decades in Delta Force, the elite of the elite, leading missions that no one would ever read about. He had been the ghost that struck without warning and vanished without a trace. His hands, steady as they were now, had done things that even he didn't want to remember. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the memories wash over him. The sharp crack of gunfire, the chaos of combat, the fleeting sense of purpose in the heat of a mission, all of it had felt so far away when he first came to the valley. But the tire tracks, the strangers, and Felix Romero's veiled threats had ripped those memories back to the surface. The peace he had cultivated here wasn't just fragile, it was an illusion. And now, The past was demanding its due. Eli moved to the far corner of the barn, where an old workbench was piled with tools and scraps of wood. With a practiced motion, he swept the clutter aside, revealing a hidden latch beneath. He pulled it, and a section of the floor lifted with a faint creak, revealing a concealed compartment. The sight of the hidden arsenal sent a chill of familiarity through him. A rifle, disassembled but pristine, rested in a phone-lined case. Next to it were magazines of ammunition, a tactical knife, night vision goggles, and a compact but powerful communications device. The equipment was meticulously maintained, every piece cleaned and oiled as though he had been preparing for this moment all along. Eli crouched and lifted the rifle from its case. His hands moved with muscle memory as he reassembled it, each piece clicking into place with precision. The weight of the weapon in his hands was a reminder of who he had been, and who he might need to become again. As he worked, his thoughts wandered to the men who had once fought by his side. Gabe Knox, the sniper who could put a bullet through a moving target at a mile's distance. Ryan Alvarez, a demolitions expert whose calm demeanor belied the explosions he could create. Zane Carter, the quiet genius who could crack codes and intercept communications with ease. And Luke Nash, the medic who had saved their lives more times than any of them could count. They had been more than a team, they had been brothers. Eli set the rifle aside and reached for a small metal box at the bottom of the compartment. Inside was a stack of old photos, each one a snapshot of a moment they had shared. Gabe, leaning casually against a Humvee with his rifle slung over his shoulder. Ryan, grinning as he rigged a bridge with explosives. Zane, hunched over a laptop in the back of a transport truck. Luke, bandaging a wound with the calm precision of a surgeon. And Eli, always in the background, watching, planning, leading. He flipped through the photos slowly, his fingers brushing against the edges as if they were relics from another life. They had all walked away eventually, each for their own reasons. Gabe had started a shooting range. Ryan had taken over his family's mechanic shop. Zane had retreated to a cabin in the mountains, content to tinker with radios and stay off the grid. And Luke had become a small-town doctor, trading battlefields for hospitals. But they had all carried the same burden, the same knowledge that no matter how far they ran, the world they had left behind would always find a way to catch up. Eli knew that better than anyone. He glanced at Ranger, who was sitting patiently nearby, his sharp eyes watching every move. "Looks like it's time to call the boys," Eli said softly, his voice carrying the weight of inevitability. Standing, he placed the photos back in the box and returned it to the compartment. He checked the rest of the arsenal, ensuring that everything was ready. Then he closed the hatch and covered it with the workbench clutter once more. The barn returned to its usual state, but the air inside felt charged, as though the walls themselves knew what was coming. Eli walked back toward the house, Ranger trotting faithfully at his side. The sun was setting, painting the valley in hues of orange and red. The quiet was deceptive, a thin veneer over the storm that was brewing. Once inside, Eli sat at the small wooden table in his kitchen. He opened a drawer and pulled out an old notebook, its pages filled with scribbled notes and phone numbers. Flipping to the back, he found the numbers he was looking for, numbers he hadn't dialed in years. He picked up the phone and hesitated for a moment. Calling them would mean more than just assembling a team. It would mean admitting that the quiet life he had built here was over. But the alternative, standing alone against the cartel, wasn't an option. He owed it to the valley, to the people like Maya Clark who still believed this place was worth fighting for. Eli took a deep breath and began dialing. The first number rang twice before a familiar voice answered. "Rough but warm." "Eli?" "Been a while." "Gabe." Eli said, leaning back in his chair. You busy? There was a brief pause, followed by a chuckle. Busy enough. What's going on? Eli's tone didn't waver. I've got a situation. Could use your expertise. Gabe didn't hesitate. Tell me when and where. Eli allowed himself a small smile. I'll send you the details. Bring your rifle. Wouldn't leave home without it. Gabe replied. Looking forward to seeing you again. Phantom. As the call ended, Eli set the phone down and stared out the window at the darkening sky. 1 call down. 3 to go. By the time the sun rose again, the Phantom wouldn't be alone. Ranger rested his head on Eli's knee. His eyes filled with quiet understanding. Eli scratched behind the dog's ears and sighed. Guess it's time to wake the ghosts. The early morning light filtered through the windows of Eli Warren's small kitchen as he leaned over the notebook, dialing the second number on the list. The line rang 3 times before a familiar, laid-back voice answered. Eli Warren. Ryan Alvarez said. The faint sound of clinking metal and muffled machinery in the background. I thought you'd gone off the grid for good. Not quite. Eli replied evenly. Still keeping busy? Ryan chuckled. You could say that. Got a transmission torn apart on the shop floor and a customer breathing down my neck. What's going on? Eli didn't waste words. I've got a situation out here. A group of bad actors trying to push the locals off their land. Ryan was silent for a moment, his tone turning serious. Cartel? Looks like it. Eli confirmed. They're organized, well-funded, and they're starting to make threats. I need your skills. Explosives or engines? Ryan asked, a hint of humor in his voice. Both. Eli said. Think you can leave that transmission for a few days? I've been looking for an excuse to step away. Ryan admitted. Send me the details. Eli nodded to himself. You'll need more than a wrench for this one. Ryan's voice grew quieter, more focused. I'll bring my kit. Same old Eli. Huh. Always calling when the stakes are high. Always. Eli replied, his tone steady. See you soon. After hanging up, Eli stared at the phone for a beat before flipping to the next number. He dialed, and the call was answered almost immediately. This is Zane, a voice said. Sharp and businesslike. It's Eli, he replied. There was a pause before Zane Carter let out a small laugh. Well, I'll be. The ghost of Montana calls. What's the occasion? Cartel. Eli said simply. They're moving into the valley. Things are going to get ugly. Sounds like you need a signal man. Zane said, his tone already shifting into problem-solving mode. You know I can't say no to that. I wouldn't ask if I didn't need you. Eli said. Bring everything. I'll pack up the station. Zane replied. Don't expect me to be subtle. Subtle isn't the plan. Eli said before ending the call. The third call had been as efficient as Eli expected. Zane hadn't changed much in the years since they'd last worked together. He had always been methodical, direct, and reliable. The kind of person who could make sense of chaos with a keyboard and a radio set. Eli glanced at the last number in the notebook. This call wouldn't be as easy. He dialed and waited as the line rang longer than the others had. Finally, a voice answered. Dr. Nash. Luke. It's Eli, he said, keeping his tone neutral. The line went quiet for a moment before Luke Nash sighed. Eli. It's been a while. Too long. Eli admitted. How's life? Quiet. Luke said. Small town. Small problems. No one's shooting at me anymore. Eli let the comment hang in the air before replying. That might change. Luke groaned softly. You're not calling to catch up. Are you? Cartel. Eli said bluntly. They're pressuring people in the valley. I need the team. You're serious? Luke said, his tone shifting to concern. How bad is it? They're organized. And they've already started making threats. Eli explained. We're not dealing with amateurs. Luke hesitated. I'm not sure I'm the guy you need for this. I'm out of practice. You're exactly the guy I need. Eli said firmly. This isn't just about tactics. It's about protecting people. The valley needs us. There was a long silence before Luke finally spoke. I'll pack my bag. Bring your med kit. Eli said. And a change of clothes. Luke chuckled dryly. You always did know how to twist my arm. It's a gift. Eli replied. See you soon. The call ended. And Eli leaned back in his chair. The team was coming together. And not a moment too soon. He looked out the window at the field stretching toward the horizon. The quiet stillness of the valley belying the storm that was approaching. By late afternoon, the first of them arrived. Gabe Knox's truck rumbled up the driveway. A dust cloud trailing behind it. Eli stepped outside as Gabe climbed out. His rifle case slung over one shoulder. He hadn't changed much, still tall. Lean. And with the same calm confidence that had made him the team's best shot. Good to see you. Phantom. Gabe said with a grin. Clasping Eli's hand in a firm shake. Glad you could make it. Eli replied. How's the range? Same as ever. Gabe said. Glancing around the property. Looks like you've been keeping busy. Busy enough. Eli said. You've got everything? Everything I need. Gabe replied. Tapping the rifle case. Where's the rest of the crew? On their way. Eli said. Ryan's next. True to Eli's prediction. Ryan Alvarez arrived not long after. His pickup was loaded with toolboxes and a suspiciously large duffel bag. He hopped out with a grin. His easygoing demeanor masking the sharp mind that had saved them more than once in the field. Farm's looking good. Eli. Ryan said. Shaking his hand. Ready to blow it up if we have to. Let's hope it doesn't come to that. Eli replied. Where's the sniper? Ryan asked. Spotting Gabe leaning against the porch railing. Right here. Gabe called. Raising a hand. Glad to see you didn't forget how to pack. The three men exchanged a few more words before Zane Carter pulled in. His truck loaded with antennas, cables, and electronics. He stepped out, adjusting his glasses and giving a small nod of acknowledgement. Looks like we're getting the band back together. Zane said. Still as subtle as ever. Ryan quipped. Eyeing the mountain of equipment in the truck bed. Subtlety doesn't win wars. Zane replied. His tone matter of fact. Finally. Luke Nash arrived. His SUV packed with medical supplies and a duffel bag of personal items. He stepped out. Looking more hesitant than the others but no less determined. Luke. Eli greeted. Shaking his hand. Glad you're here. Let's hope I'm not needed too much. Luke said. Glancing at the others. Feels like old times. Except we're older. Gabe said. Smirking. Speak for yourself. Ryan shot back. I'm just as quick as I was 10 years ago. Quick to complain. Zane muttered. Earning a laugh from the group. As the sun dipped low on the horizon. The five men stood together for the first time in years. The valley. Quiet and unassuming. seemed to hold its breath as they gathered on Eli's porch. They weren't soldiers anymore. Not officially. But the bonds between them hadn't faded. Eli looked at each of them in turn. His voice steady. "We've got work to do." The 5 men stood around Eli's dining table, which was now cleared of its usual clutter and replaced with a detailed topographical map of the valley. Zane Carter had already set up a laptop and a portable radio system on a nearby counter. The soft hum of electronics filling the room. Ryan Alvarez leaned over the map, tapping his fingers thoughtfully against the wooden surface, while Gabe Knox scanned the layout with the practiced eye of a sniper. Luke Nash sat at the edge of the table, flipping through a medical supply list he had brought with him. Eli stood at the head of the table, his presence commanding but calm. "Here's what we know," he began, his voice even. "The cartel's been targeting properties across the valley. They've pressured several families into selling. And those who resist are facing threats. Felix Romero is running the local operation. And they're well-funded and organized. They're not subtle," Gabe said. His tone clipped. "But they don't have to be. Intimidation is their game." Ryan nodded, scratching his chin. "We're not dealing with amateurs. That's for sure. If they've got resources, they'll have people watching this place." "They're watching," Zane confirmed, glancing up from his laptop. "I've picked up chatter on a few unencrypted channels. Nothing specific yet. But it's clear they're keeping tabs on you." Eli nodded. "Good. Let them. It'll keep their focus here while we prepare." Speaking of preparing, Luke interjected. "What's the plan if this turns into an all-out assault? We've got 5 people against an unknown number. That's where strategy comes in." Eli replied. He pointed to the map, where several areas had been marked with red and blue circles. "The valley's terrain gives us an advantage. Open fields here and here," he indicated with his finger. "Our kill zones. We funnel them into these areas and neutralize them before they can get close." Ryan smirked. "Funnel them how?" "Explosives," Eli said simply. "We'll rig the access points, roads, trails, any choke points we can find. Force them to take predictable routes." "That's my department," Ryan said, already mentally cataloging what he'd need. "How much are we talking?" "Enough to slow them down and cause chaos," Eli replied. "We don't need to destroy everything. Just make them hesitate." "Works for me," Ryan said with a shrug. "I'll need to make a run into town for supplies." "I'll go with you," Luke said. "Might as well stock up on medical supplies while we're at it." "Good," Eli said. He turned to Gabe. "You'll be up high, covering the approach. There's a ridge here," he pointed to a spot on the map, "with a clear line of sight to the main road. You'll have the first shot." Gabe's eyes lit up with focus. "Perfect. I'll set up there tonight." "What about comms?" Zane asked, his fingers flying over the keyboard as he monitored frequencies. "We'll need to stay connected, especially if they try to jam us." "I trust you've got that handled," Eli said. Zane smirked. "You know me. They won't even know we're listening in." Eli stepped back from the table, his gaze sweeping over the group. "This isn't just about defending the farm. It's about sending a message. The cartel thinks they can take this valley without resistance. We're going to show them they're wrong." There was a brief silence as the weight of his words settled over the room. Then Gabe broke it with a low chuckle. "I missed this. Planning. Strategizing. Taking on the bad guys. Feels like old times. Except now we're older," Luke said, shaking his head. "Let's hope we're not slower." "Speak for yourself," Ryan quipped. "I'm still in my prime." The group laughed softly, the tension easing for a moment. Eli allowed himself a small smile but quickly returned to the task at hand. We've got a lot to do. And not much time to do it. Let's get to work. As dusk fell, the team split off to their assigned tasks. Gabe shouldered his rifle and headed toward the ridge Eli had marked on the map. The climb was steep, but he moved with the ease of someone who had done this hundreds of times before. When he reached the top, he settled into a natural vantage point, unpacking his gear with meticulous precision. Through the scope of his rifle, he scanned the main road leading into the valley, noting every potential blind spot and escape route. "Ridge is secure," he said into his radio, his voice crackling over the line. "Copy that." Zane replied from the farmhouse. "Keep an eye out. I'll patch you into any chatter I pick up." Meanwhile, Ryan and Luke loaded supplies into the back of Ryan's truck. They had compiled a list of essentials, everything from fertilizer and fuel for improvised explosives to medical supplies and first aid kits. As they pulled out of the driveway, Ryan glanced at Luke. "Bet you didn't think you'd be doing this again," Ryan said with a grin. "Not exactly what I had in mind when I became a doctor," Luke admitted. "But if it keeps people alive, it's worth it." Back at the farmhouse, Zane worked tirelessly, setting up a network of surveillance equipment. Small cameras were mounted on trees and fence posts, their feeds relayed to his laptop. He also programmed motion sensors to alert the team of any movement along the perimeter. "Systems up and running," Zane reported. "We've got eyes everywhere." "Good work," Eli replied. He was outside, walking the perimeter with Ranger at his side. The dog moved silently, his nose low to the ground as he sniffed for anything unusual. Eli's sharp eyes scanned the horizon, noting every detail, the way the wind moved the tall grass, the faint rustle of leaves in the distance. Nothing escaped his notice. By the time the sun had fully set, the team regrouped at the farmhouse. They gathered on the porch, the cool night air heavy with the scent of pine. Eli leaned against the railing, his arms crossed as he addressed the group. "We've got a solid plan," he said. "But plans don't always survive first contact. Stay sharp, stay flexible, and trust each other. That's how we win." The team nodded, their expressions resolute. They had been through worse, and they knew what was at stake. As the others dispersed to rest or prepare, Eli lingered on the porch, staring out into the darkness. Ranger sat at his feet, his ears twitching at every sound. Eli's mind was already running through contingencies, analyzing every possible scenario. He glanced down at Ranger and gave a faint smile. "If they think they're prepared," he muttered, his voice low, "they've never met us." The first to arrive was Gabe Knox. His pickup truck rolled up the gravel driveway just after sunrise, the bed packed with a rifle case, a duffel bag, and enough supplies to suggest he wasn't planning to leave anytime soon. Gabe stepped out, stretching his tall, lean frame before adjusting the hat that shaded his sharp, calculating eyes. "Eli," he called, a grin spreading across his face as he approached. "Still keeping this place in one piece?" "I see." Eli stepped off the porch, meeting Gabe halfway. The handshake between them was firm, a silent acknowledgement of the bond they shared. "Good to see you, Gabe. You travel light?" Gabe chuckled. "Just the essentials. Thought I'd leave the kitchen sink behind this time." The two men exchanged a brief glance that spoke volumes. It had been years since they had stood on the same ground, but the familiarity of working together returned in an instant. Gabe glanced around the property, his sniper's instincts kicking in as he mentally noted vantage points and potential threats. "Nice place you've got here. Quiet. Too quiet." That's about to change. Unfortunately. Eli agreed, motioning toward the barn. Let's get you set up. The others should be here soon. Ryan Alvarez showed up next, his truck rumbling loudly as he pulled into the driveway. The bed of his vehicle was filled with toolboxes, bags of fertilizer, and several heavy-duty cases that clearly didn't contain farming equipment. Ryan hopped out, his easy grin masking the sharp mind beneath. Eli, you've been holding out on me, Ryan said, gesturing to the sprawling fields and towering trees surrounding the property. You never mentioned you were hiding out in paradise. Eli smirked. Paradise until now. Glad you made it. Ryan's handshake was warm, his demeanor as relaxed as always. He glanced at Gabe, who was leaning against the porch railing. Look who crawled out of his sniper nest. Good to see you, Ryan. Gabe replied, still playing with fire. I see. Fire. Wires. Explosives, you name it. Ryan said with a wink. I'm here to make sure this place doesn't blow up unless we want it to. Eli nodded toward the barn. Let's get everything unloaded. You're going to need space to work. Ryan gave a mock salute. On it, boss. The low hum of Zane Carter's truck was the next sound to echo through the valley. Zane stepped out, his glasses catching the sunlight as he surveyed the farm with quiet intensity. The bed of his truck was loaded with electronics, cables, antennas, monitors, and equipment that looked more suited for a military base than a farmhouse. Still a minimalist. I see, Eli said dryly as Zane approached. Always prepared, Zane replied, his voice calm and measured. He shook Eli's hand before glancing at the others. Gabe. Ryan. Good to see you're still in one piece. Barely, Ryan quipped, loading another case onto a dolly. Glad you brought the brains. Zane. We're going to need them. Zane smirked faintly. Someone has to keep you out of trouble. As Zane began unpacking his gear, he immediately started talking through his setup. I've got cameras, motion sensors, and a portable communication hub. Once everything's up and running, we'll have full coverage of the property. No one gets in without us knowing. Eli nodded approvingly. That's exactly what we need. Underscore 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 underscore. Luke Nash arrived last, pulling into the driveway in his SUV. His demeanor was quieter than the others, more cautious, but no less determined. As he stepped out, he adjusted the strap on a large medical bag slung over his shoulder. Luke, Eli said, meeting him halfway. Glad you're here. Luke shook his hand, his grip steady. Wouldn't miss it. Though I have to admit, I was hoping I wouldn't need to patch anyone up this time around. Let's hope it doesn't come to that, Eli replied. But it's good to have you here. Just in case. Luke's gaze swept over the property, taking in the activity as the others unloaded gear and began setting up. Looks like the old team's back together. Feels like old times, Gabe said, stepping forward to shake Luke's hand. Let's just hope we're not too old for this. Luke gave a small laugh, though there was a weight behind it. Speak for yourself. Ryan clapped a hand on Luke's shoulder as he passed by. Don't worry. Document. You'll be patching us up just like the good old days. By midday, the group was gathered in the barn, which had been transformed into a makeshift operations center. Zane had set up a series of monitors and a radio system, while Ryan had organized his tools and materials along one wall. Gabe leaned against a workbench, cleaning his rifle, and Luke stood nearby, unpacking medical supplies. Eli stood at the center, looking around at the familiar faces. "We've all been through worse than this," he began, his voice steady. "But this time, we're not just fighting for ourselves. The people in this valley are counting on us to protect them. That means we have to be sharp, focused, and ready for anything." The team nodded, their expressions serious. Despite the years apart, the bond between them was as strong as ever. They knew each other's strengths, weaknesses, and quirks. They didn't need long explanations or detailed instructions, just a plan and the trust that each man would do his part. Ryan broke the tension with a grin. "So, what's the first step? Blowing something up?" Eli smirked. "Not yet. First, we scout. We need to know exactly what we're up against." "Surveillance is already up and running," Zane reported. "I've got cameras covering the perimeter and motion sensors along the main access points. If anyone so much as sneezes near this place, we'll know." "Good," Eli said. "Gabe, you'll take the ridge. I want eyes on the main road and the surrounding area." "Consider it done," Gabe replied, already packing his gear. "Ryan, you're in charge of fortifications," Eli continued. "Start with the most vulnerable spots. We'll expand as we go." "On it," Ryan said, rubbing his hands together. "Time to get creative." "Luke, set up a medical station," Eli added. "Make sure we're ready for anything." Luke nodded. "I'll make do with what I've got. And I'll coordinate from here," Zane said. "I'll keep you updated on everything I see." Eli looked around the room, his expression resolute. "This isn't just about defending my farm. If we do this right, we send a message to the cartel: the valley isn't theirs to take." The team exchanged glances, their determination evident. Despite the weight of the task ahead, there was a sense of purpose in the room, a feeling that they were exactly where they needed to be. "Let's get to work," Eli said. Without another word, the team dispersed, each man moving with purpose. The quiet camaraderie and shared resolve were a testament to their years of experience. They had been through hell together before, and now they were ready to do it again. The valley's peace was fragile, but with them standing together, it had a fighting chance. The sun was low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the valley as Gabe Knox crouched on the ridge overlooking the main road. His rifle rested on a bipod, the scope already zeroed in on a black SUV parked a mile away. Beside him, Zane Carter had set up a compact monitoring station, his laptop and radio equipment buzzing faintly in the stillness. "There they are," Gabe muttered, his voice low but steady. He adjusted the scope, his sharp eyes tracking the movements of two men standing near the SUV. Felix Romero and one of his guys. "Looks like they're having a little meeting." Zane didn't look up from his screen. "I'm picking up chatter on a local frequency. It's encrypted, but sloppy. Give me a minute, and I'll crack it." Gabe's focus remained on the target. Felix was pacing, gesturing animatedly as he spoke to the other man. Even from this distance, Gabe could see the tension in his movements, the way Felix's hands moved with precision, like someone used to issuing commands. "He's ex-military. No doubt about it," Gabe said. "The way he carries himself, the way he talks to his men. He's not just some street thug." "That tracks," Zane replied, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "Got it." Intercepted a fragment of their conversation. "They're reporting to someone called El Diablo. Wonderful. Gabe said dryly. Sounds like a real pleasant guy. Zane's face tightened as he continued to listen. He's not just a nickname. Miguel El Diablo Santos. Former Mexican Special Forces. Now running cartel operations in this region. Ruthless. Strategic. And violent. Felix might be the face of this operation. But Santos is the brains. Gabe exhaled slowly, shifting his position slightly for better leverage. And we're sure he's coming here? Based on this conversation? Definitely. Zane said. Felix is giving updates on the valley. Who's sold? Who's resisting? They're planning their next moves. Gabe adjusted the focus on his scope, narrowing in on Felix's face. How many men do you think they've got? Hard to say. Zane admitted. They're not broadcasting those details. But from the way Felix is talking, it sounds like reinforcements are on the way. Gabe smirked. Reinforcements won't matter if they don't make it past this ridge. Zane gave him a sidelong glance. Let's not get cocky. Gabe. These aren't amateurs. If Santos is half as dangerous as his reputation, we're in for a fight. Good. Gabe said. His tone dark but resolute. I was starting to get bored. Back at the farm, Ryan Alvarez and Luke Nash were poring over a map of the valley, marking key points where the cartel might move. The table was strewn with tools, wires, and enough raw materials to build or destroy just about anything. So Felix is ex-military, and Santos is special forces, Ryan said, shaking his head. Great. Just what we needed, professionals with a god complex. Luke glanced up from his medical kit, his expression grim. We've faced worse. True. Ryan admitted, picking up a roll of detonation cord. But this time, we're defending civilians. Makes it a little more complicated. Luke nodded but said nothing. He returned to organizing his supplies, mentally preparing for the possibility that those civilians might need him sooner rather than later. Eli entered the barn, his presence immediately commanding attention. What have we got? Lots of moving parts, Ryan said, motioning to the map. We've identified 3 main access points the cartel might use: the North Trail, the old service road, and the creek bed on the east side. I can rig traps at all 3. But I'll need more materials for the North Trail. Get what you need, Eli said. We're not leaving anything to chance. What about the ridge? Luke asked. If Felix and his men are already scouting, they'll spot any obvious defenses. Gabe's up there now, Eli replied. He'll keep an eye on their movements and let us know if anything changes. We'll fortify the ridge later, once we have a better sense of their numbers. Zane's voice came through the radio clipped to Eli's belt. Heads up, Eli. We've got confirmation on Santos. He's coordinating from a location about 10 miles south of the valley. Sounds like he's planning to move in sooner rather than later. Eli's jaw tightened. Then we need to move faster. Keep monitoring their comms. Let me know if anything changes. Will do, Zane replied. Eli turned back to the group. We don't have much time. Let's focus on what we can control. Ryan, prioritize the traps. Luke, make sure the medical station is ready. I'll work with Zane to tighten up the surveillance grid. What about the locals? Luke asked. If the cartel escalates, they could get caught in the crossfire. We'll warn them, Eli said. But most of them already know something's coming. Maya's been keeping them informed. They'll stay out of the way. Luke frowned but didn't argue. He knew Eli well enough to trust his judgment, even if he didn't like the risks involved. As night fell, The team regrouped in the barn to review the day's progress. Zane had set up a large monitor displaying a live feed from the surveillance cameras scattered around the property. The screen showed the main access points, each one overlaid with motion sensors and heat maps. Coverage is solid, Zane reported. If anyone gets within 100 yards of this place, we'll know. Ryan grinned. And if they make it past that, they'll have to deal with me. Gabe smirked. Let's hope they're dumb enough to try. Eli studied the monitor, his expression thoughtful. They will. Felix isn't the type to back down, especially with Santos breathing down his neck. What's the plan if they hit us all at once? Luke asked. We can't be everywhere at the same time. We won't need to be, Eli said. The traps and surveillance will give us the advantage. They'll come in waves, testing our defenses. We just need to hold the line. And if Santos shows up personally? Ryan asked. Eli's eyes narrowed. Then we make sure he regrets it. The barn fell silent for a moment as the weight of the situation settled over them. Despite the odds, there was no hesitation in their resolve. They had been through too much together to falter now. As the team began to disperse, Zane glanced at one of the monitors and froze. Hold on, he said, his voice sharp. We've got movement on the north trail. Eli and Gabe moved quickly to his side, their eyes narrowing at the grainy footage. A lone figure was creeping along the trail, moving cautiously but not cautiously enough. Cartel scout, Gabe said, already reaching for his rifle. Not yet, Eli said, holding up a hand. Let's see what he does. The figure continued down the trail, unaware that he had just triggered a silent alarm. A faint red light on Zane's console began to blink, confirming the breach. Amateur, Ryan muttered. The scout paused, glancing around nervously before continuing. Eli's voice was cold and steady. Let him go. We don't want them to know we're watching. Not yet. The team watched as the figure disappeared back down the trail, the monitor returning to stillness. The silence in the barn was thick with tension. They'll know something's off when he doesn't find anything, Gabe said. Good, Eli replied. Let them wonder. It'll keep them off balance. The team exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of anticipation and determination. The first move had been made, and the game was about to begin. Ryan Alvarez stood at the edge of the north trail, hands on his hips as he surveyed the overgrown path leading into Eli's property. His toolbox and several spools of detonation cord lay on the ground beside him, along with a stack of motion-triggered devices. Gabe Knox had scouted the trail earlier and marked the ideal places for Ryan to work, choke points where the terrain would force anyone approaching to slow down or cluster together. Perfect for a bottleneck, Ryan muttered, crouching to unspool the det cord. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, attaching small, concealed explosives to key points along the trail. He rigged each charge with a remote trigger, giving the team complete control over when to activate them. A motion sensor was placed farther down the trail, calibrated to alert Zane if anyone entered the area. Gabe, positioned nearby with his rifle slung across his back, leaned against a tree and watched. You're enjoying this too much, Ryan smirked, not looking up from his work. You know me, give me some wires and something that goes boom, and I'm a happy guy. You sure this is enough to slow them down? Gabe asked, his tone serious. Oh, it'll do more than slow them down, Ryan replied. If they're dumb enough to come through here, they're gonna have a bad day. Gabe nodded, his sharp eyes scanning the tree line. Let's hope it works. It will, Ryan said confidently, finishing his last connection and stepping back to admire his work. This trail's locked down, Let's move on to the next spot. On the east side of the property, Eli and Luke Nash worked together to secure the creek bed. The natural depression made it an ideal access point for anyone trying to approach the farm undetected. But it was also a vulnerability that needed to be addressed. Eli crouched by the water's edge, hammering stakes into the ground to support a series of tripwires. Each wire was attached to a small flashbang device, designed to disorient anyone who triggered it. These will buy us time, Eli said, tightening the final wire. Enough for us to respond. Luke, standing a few feet away with a bag of supplies, nodded. I've got the med station set up near the barn. If things go south, we'll have a safe place to treat injuries. Good, Eli said, standing and wiping his hands on his jeans. He turned to Luke, his expression serious. You ready for this? Luke hesitated, his eyes flicking to the creek before meeting Eli's gaze. I'm ready. I just hope it doesn't come to that. Eli placed a hand on his shoulder, his grip firm but reassuring. It might. But if it does, I need you focused. The team's counting on you. Luke nodded, his resolve hardening. I won't let you down. You never have. Eli replied, his tone steady. Let's move on. We've got more ground to cover. Meanwhile, Zane Carter was back at the barn, fine-tuning the surveillance network. The monitors displayed live feeds from the cameras placed around the property, each one providing a clear view of the key access points. Zane's fingers flew over the keyboard as he calibrated the motion sensors and linked them to his alert system. Everything synced. Zane muttered to himself, glancing at the blinking lights on his console. If they so much as breathe too hard near this place, we'll know. Ryan and Gabe entered the barn a moment later, their boots tracking dirt across the floor. North trail's done, Ryan announced, dropping his toolbox onto the table. It's a work of art, if I do say so myself. I'll check it later, Zane said, not looking up from his screen. But if it's anything like your last masterpiece, we'll be fine. Ryan grinned. You doubt me? Always, Zane replied dryly, earning a laugh from both Ryan and Gabe. Eli and Luke returned shortly after, their presence bringing the team together once more. Eli wasted no time, stepping to the center of the barn and addressing the group. Everything's in place? North trail's rigged, Ryan said. They'll regret stepping foot on it. Creek bed's covered, Eli added. Tripwires and flashbangs. Surveillance is live, Zane confirmed. We've got full visibility. Good, Eli said, his voice firm. That means we're ready for the next step. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the valley in twilight, the team moved into position. Gabe took up his post on the ridge, his rifle resting on its bipod as he scanned the landscape through the scope. The motion sensors were quiet for now, but Gabe remained vigilant, his finger resting lightly on the trigger. Down at the barn, Zane monitored the cameras, his sharp eyes flicking between the screens. The others stood nearby, watching in silence as the tension in the room grew thicker. It didn't take long for the first sign of trouble to appear. A faint beep from Zane's console drew everyone's attention. Motion sensor. North trail, he said, his voice low but urgent. Eli stepped closer, his gaze fixed on the monitor displaying the feed from the trail. A lone figure was moving cautiously through the trees, their silhouette barely visible in the fading light. Scout. Gabe's voice crackled over the radio. He's alone. Let him come, Eli said, his tone cold and calculating. We need to see what they're looking for. The team watched in tense silence as the scout moved closer. His movements careful but not careful enough. He stopped briefly, glancing around before continuing down the trail. The motion sensors tracked his every step, sending real-time alerts to Zane's system. As the scout approached one of the traps Ryan had rigged, he froze, his head snapping up as if he sensed something was off. He crouched low, examining the ground. But the trap was too well hidden for him to notice. "Do we take him out?" Gabe asked over the radio, his voice steady. "Not yet," Eli replied. "Let him make his move." The scout stood and backed away slowly, his movements now more cautious. He didn't trip the trap, but his hesitation was telling. It was clear he knew something wasn't right. "He's spooked," Ryan muttered, watching the feed. "Good. Let him go back and tell them we're ready." The scout retreated down the trail, disappearing into the trees. The motion sensors went quiet, but the tension in the barn didn't ease. "They'll be back," Gabe said over the radio. "And next time, they won't come alone." Eli nodded, his expression grim. "Let them come. We'll be ready." The team exchanged glances, their resolve unshaken. They knew the fight was just beginning, but they were prepared for whatever came next. Together, they would hold the line and protect the valley, no matter the cost. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to our channel, it means so much to us. Now, let's get back to the story. The farmhouse was cloaked in darkness, the valley quiet except for the faint rustle of wind in the trees. Inside the barn, Zane Carter sat hunched over his console, the soft glow of the monitors illuminating his face. The rest of the team was scattered, each man stationed at their assigned post. Eli was outside, pacing the perimeter with Ranger, his sharp eyes scanning the horizon. The first alert came just past midnight, a faint beep from the motion sensors on the north trail. Zane straightened in his chair, his fingers flying over the keyboard as he switched the monitor feed. "We've got movement," he said into his radio, his voice low but urgent. "Location?" Eli's voice crackled back. "North Trail. Multiple heat signatures. Looks like they're coming in fast." Zane replied. "Copy that. Stay sharp," Eli ordered. He clicked off the radio and glanced down at Ranger, who was already growling softly. "It's starting," Eli muttered. Up on the ridge, Gabe Knox adjusted his rifle scope, scanning the trail below. Through the moonlight and thermal imaging, he could see the silhouettes of several men moving cautiously but steadily toward the farm. A black SUV idled farther back, its headlights off but engine running. Gabe keyed his radio. "I count at least 8. Armed and moving in formation. Looks like they're testing us." "Let them come," Eli replied. "Ryan, get ready." Ryan Alvarez was already crouched near the barn, his hands resting on the trigger for the traps he had rigged along the trail. "Ready and waiting," he said, a grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. The cartel's men moved closer, unaware of the danger they were walking into. The first man stepped into the kill zone, his foot triggering a hidden tripwire. There was a sharp click, followed by a deafening explosion as a small but powerful charge detonated, sending dirt and debris flying. The blast disoriented the group, scattering them into chaos. "Boom," Ryan muttered, flipping a second switch. Another explosive went off farther down the trail, cutting off their escape route. Gabe took the opportunity to fire, his sniper rifle's suppressed shot barely audible. The first man dropped before he even realized what had hit him. Gabe quickly shifted targets, taking out a second and third with precision shots. "They're panicking," Gabe reported, watching through his scope as the remaining men scrambled for cover. We've got them pinned. The motion sensors lit up again, showing more heat signatures approaching from the east. Zane cursed under his breath. We've got a second group coming in from the creek bed. Looks like they're trying to flank us. Luke, you're up, Eli said into the radio. Hold the line at the creek. On it. Luke Nash replied. He was already positioned near the water, his shotgun loaded and ready. As the second group of cartel men moved in, they tripped another series of flashbangs rigged along the creek. The sudden bursts of light and sound threw them into disarray, giving Luke the opening he needed. He fired, the echo of his shotgun reverberating through the valley. Back on the North Trail, the first group of cartel men had begun to regroup, using the trees for cover. One of them pulled out a handheld radio, barking orders in rapid Spanish. Gabe picked off the man with another shot, silencing him before he could finish. They're trying to coordinate, Gabe said. Not happening. Good work, Eli said. He moved toward the barn, his rifle at the ready. Ryan, how's the south side? Quiet for now, Ryan replied. But I don't trust it. Feels like they're holding back. They are, Eli said grimly. This is just the first wave. The remaining cartel men on the North Trail made a desperate push toward the farm. But Ryan was ready. He flipped another switch, triggering a series of small explosions that forced them to retreat. Gabe took out two more as they fell back, leaving only one man standing. Hold your fire, Eli ordered. He moved toward the last man, who was crouched behind a fallen log, clutching a pistol with trembling hands. Eli approached cautiously, his rifle trained on the man. Drop it, he commanded. The cartel man hesitated but finally complied, letting the pistol fall to the ground. Eli grabbed him by the collar and hauled him to his feet, disarming him with a practiced motion. Zane, get the zip ties, Eli said over his shoulder. Zane emerged from the barn, carrying a handful of plastic restraints. He bound the man's hands behind his back while Ryan and Luke arrived to secure the area. The rest of the team quickly regrouped, their weapons at the ready as they scanned the horizon for any additional threats. Who sent you? Eli demanded, his voice cold and commanding. The man said nothing, his eyes darting nervously between the team members. Eli tightened his grip on the man's collar. I won't ask again. Before the man could answer, Zane's console beeped again. We've got more movement, he said, his tone urgent. South side this time. 3 vehicles. Eli shoved the captive toward Ryan. Secure him in the barn. We'll deal with him later. On it, Ryan said, dragging the man toward the barn as the rest of the team prepared for the next wave. Gabe's voice came through the radio. Vehicles are stopping about half a mile out. Looks like they're unloading. More reinforcements, Luke muttered, checking his ammo. Let's keep them guessing, Eli said. Zane, can you patch into their comms? Already working on it, Zane replied, typing furiously on his laptop. Give me a minute. The team moved into position, their movements quick and precise. Eli took the lead, signaling for Gabe to hold the ridge while the rest of them spread out along the property's perimeter. The air was thick with tension as they waited for the next assault to begin. It came sooner than expected. The sound of gunfire erupted from the south, followed by the roar of an engine as one of the cartel's vehicles sped toward the farm. Ryan's traps activated, sending a plume of fire and debris into the air as the vehicle was disabled. Vehicle down, Gabe reported, taking out one of the men who had been riding in the back. The rest are on foot. Eli nodded. His focus unwavering. Hold the line. Don't let them get close. The team held their ground, using a combination of traps, sniper fire, and coordinated tactics to repel the attackers. The cartel's men, despite their numbers, were no match for the team's experience and preparation. One by one, they fell, their assault crumbling under the weight of the team's resistance. When the dust finally settled, the property was silent once more. The team regrouped in the barn, where Ryan had secured the captured cartel man in a chair, his hands still bound behind his back. Eli looked at the captive, his expression cold. You've got one chance to start talking. Who sent you? The man hesitated, his gaze flicking nervously between the team members. Finally, he spoke, his voice trembling. You're already dead. El Diablo is coming for you. The words hung in the air, heavy with menace. Eli's jaw tightened, but he didn't flinch. We'll see about that. The team exchanged grim looks, the warning a stark reminder that the fight was far from over. Eli turned to Zane. Keep monitoring their comms. We need to know what's coming next. Zane nodded, already returning to his console. The team dispersed to reinforce their defenses, knowing that the first skirmish was only the beginning. The real battle was still ahead. The adrenaline of the initial attack still coursed through the team as they regrouped near the barn. Zane Carter's console was lit up with alerts, each one signaling movement around the property. The cartel had retreated temporarily, but Eli Warren knew better than to think they were done. They're testing us, Eli said, his voice calm but firm. That first wave was to see what we're capable of. The second wave will be worse. Gabe Knox adjusted the strap of his rifle as he walked back to the group. They've got more people coming. I saw at least a dozen in the distance before they pulled back. Zane's fingers flew over the keyboard, pulling up the surveillance feeds. Southside is quiet for now, but I'm picking up radio chatter. They're regrouping. They'll hit us again soon. We stick to the plan, Eli said. He turned to Ryan Alvarez. You've got the creek bed fortified? Everything's set, Ryan replied, tapping the detonator clip to his belt. They won't get through without a welcome party. Eli gave a nod of approval before glancing at Luke Nash. Luke, stay close to the barn. You'll need to be ready when they push harder. Luke tightened the strap of his medical bag and gave a curt nod. I'm ready. A sharp beep from Zane's console cut the conversation short. We've got movement, he said, his tone urgent. East side. Heading toward the creek. Here we go, Eli said, gripping his rifle. Gabe, take the ridge. Ryan, you're with me. Luke, stay on comms with Zane. The team moved with precision, each man falling into his role without hesitation. Gabe climbed back to his sniper's perch on the ridge, settling into position as he scanned the horizon. Below, Eli and Ryan took cover near the creek, their eyes fixed on the tree line. The silence was broken by the distant sound of footsteps crunching through the brush. A group of cartel men emerged, their weapons drawn as they moved cautiously toward the farm. Ryan's hand hovered over the detonator, waiting for Eli's signal. Wait, Eli whispered. He watched as the group moved closer, their formation tightening as they entered the kill zone. Now, Ryan pressed the button, and the night exploded with light and sound. A series of small charges detonated, sending debris flying and disorienting the cartel men. Gabe's rifle cracked from the ridge, and two men dropped instantly, their bodies crumpling to the ground. The remaining men scrambled for cover, firing blindly into the darkness. Eli and Ryan moved quickly, using the chaos to their advantage. Eli took out 2 more with precise, controlled shots, while Ryan lobbed a smoke grenade to obscure their movements. They're scattered, Gabe reported over the radio. But more are coming. I count another group moving in from the south. Eli clicked his radio. Zane. You see them? Got them. Zane replied. They're using the service road. Looks like they've got vehicles this time. Gabe. Keep them busy. Eli ordered. Ryan. We're moving. The 2 men retreated from the creek, regrouping with Luke near the barn. Gabe's rifle continued to fire, each shot finding its mark as the cartel's reinforcements pushed forward. Despite their numbers, they were struggling to maintain cohesion under the team's coordinated assault. Eli's voice came through the radio again. Zane. Are the cameras on the service road still active? Affirmative. Zane said. I've got eyes on 2 vehicles. Looks like they're unloading more men. Eli turned to Ryan. We'll need to hit them before they get too close. You ready? Ryan grinned, holding up a remote detonator. Always. The 2 men moved quickly toward the service road, taking cover behind a cluster of boulders. The vehicles were parked about 50 yards ahead, their headlights cutting through the darkness. Cartel men were fanning out, their weapons drawn as they advanced toward the farm. Ryan set up another series of charges, this time using heavier explosives designed to disable the vehicles. He glanced at Eli. Say the word. Eli watched the cartel's movements carefully, waiting until they were clustered near the vehicles. Now. Ryan hit the switch, and the night erupted into chaos. The first vehicle was blown off its wheels, the explosion sending flames and shrapnel into the air. The second vehicle was engulfed in smoke, its engine sputtering before falling silent. The cartel men dove for cover, shouting orders in Spanish as they tried to regroup. Eli and Ryan opened fire, taking out 2 men before retreating back toward the farm. That'll slow them down, Ryan said, his voice tinged with satisfaction. Don't get cocky, Eli warned. We're not done yet. Back at the barn, Luke was tending to a minor wound on Gabe's arm, a graze from a stray bullet. Gabe winced but didn't complain, his focus remaining on the ridge. They're persistent. I'll give them that. They're desperate, Eli said, arriving with Ryan. And desperate people make mistakes. Zane's voice came through the radio again. We've got another group pushing from the north. Looks like they're trying to flank us. Gabe, can you cover them? Eli asked. Already on it, Gabe replied, adjusting his scope. He fired, and another cartel man dropped. But I'm running low on ammo. We need to wrap this up. Eli nodded, formulating a plan as he spoke. Ryan, take the north trail. Luke, stay here with Zane. Gabe, keep them pinned for as long as you can. What about you? Luke asked. I'll flank them from the west, Eli said. If we split their forces, we can take them out faster. The team moved into action, their years of experience shining through as they executed Eli's plan. Ryan set more traps along the north trail, using the terrain to funnel the cartel men into a narrow passage. Gabe continued firing from the ridge, each shot precise and deliberate. Eli moved silently through the trees, his rifle at the ready. He could hear the cartel men shouting to one another, their frustration growing as they struggled to advance. Eli took out 2 more with quick, controlled shots, then repositioned to avoid detection. By the time the dust settled, the cartel's assault had crumbled. Bodies littered the ground, and the surviving men retreated into the darkness, their morale shattered. The team regrouped near the barn. Their expressions a mix of exhaustion and triumph. "We did it," Ryan said, slumping against a stack of crates. "We held them off. For now," Eli said, his tone somber. "But they'll be back." Zane's console beeped again, and his expression darkened as he read the incoming data. "We've got a problem." Eli leaned over his shoulder, his eyes narrowing at the screen. "What is it?" "They're regrouping," Zane said. "And this time, they're bringing everything they've got." The team exchanged grim looks, the weight of the battle ahead settling over them. They had won the first skirmish, but the war was far from over. The air was thick with the acrid smell of smoke and scorched earth as the team gathered back in the barn. Their clothes were damp with sweat and dirt, their faces lined with exhaustion. Gabe Knox leaned against the wall, reloading his rifle with a practiced motion. Ryan Alvarez wiped soot off his hands as he sat on a crate, his breathing heavy but controlled. Eli Warren stood in the center, his presence commanding as always. His eyes swept over the room, lingering briefly on the bound Cartel lieutenant sitting in a chair near the corner. The man's face was bloodied and his wrists were zip-tied behind his back. Despite his disheveled appearance, there was a defiant gleam in his eyes. "Zane," Eli said, his tone sharp but calm. "Are we clear for now?" Zane Carter, seated at his console, nodded without looking up. "No movement on the monitors. They've retreated for now. But it won't last long. They'll be regrouping. Then we need answers," Eli said, turning his attention to the captive. He stepped forward, his boots echoing in the quiet barn. Ranger followed at his side, his sharp eyes locked on the man in the chair. The Cartel lieutenant spat blood onto the floor, his lips curling into a smirk. "You think this is over? You've made a mistake, viejo." Eli crouched to meet the man's gaze, his expression cold and unreadable. "I didn't ask for your opinion. I asked for information. Who sent you?" The man's smirk faltered slightly, but he quickly regained his composure. "You know who sent us. Felix Romero doesn't back down. And neither does Miguel Santos. El Diablo," Gabe muttered from his spot by the wall. "Charming nickname." Eli didn't react, his focus remaining on the man in the chair. "What's Santos's plan? Why the push into the valley?" The man laughed bitterly. "You think you can stop him? Santos doesn't just take land. He takes everything: money, power, respect. You're nothing to him. Just another obstacle." Eli's gaze didn't waver. "Then you'd better tell me how he plans to do it." The man leaned back as far as his restraints would allow, his defiance beginning to crack. "You don't understand who you're dealing with. Santos has men everywhere, resources you can't imagine. He'll burn this valley to the ground if that's what it takes." "Maybe," Eli said, his voice low and measured. "But you won't be around to see it unless you start talking." The man hesitated, his eyes darting between Eli and the rest of the team. The weight of the situation was beginning to sink in. Finally, he spoke, his voice quieter now. "They're planning a full assault. Felix was just the first step. Santos is bringing in more men, more firepower. He wants this valley under his control." "When?" Eli demanded. "Soon," the man replied. "He's already mobilizing. You don't have much time." Eli stood and turned to the team, his expression grim. "Zane, see if you can confirm that. Monitor their frequencies. I want to know exactly how soon." "On it," Zane said, already typing on his keyboard. Ryan glanced at the captive, his expression skeptical. "Think he's telling the truth?" He's scared, Eli said simply. And scared men don't lie well. Luke Nash stepped forward. His medical bag slung over one shoulder. We need to figure out what to do with him. Keeping him here is a risk. Eli nodded. We'll move him out of the valley. Hand him over to the authorities. For now. Lock him in the cellar. We can't afford to have him slipping away. Ryan and Gabe moved to secure the man, dragging him to his feet and leading him out of the barn. The captive didn't resist, though his expression remained defiant. As the team dispersed to reinforce their defenses, Eli lingered near Zane's console, watching the monitors. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the faint hum of the equipment. You believe him? Zane asked without looking up. Eli folded his arms, his eyes narrowing. Doesn't matter if I do. We plan for the worst. Zane nodded, his focus remaining on his work. If they're really bringing in reinforcements, we'll see movement soon. They can't stay invisible forever. Eli's radio crackled to life. Gabe's voice coming through. We've got something. What is it? Eli asked, gripping the radio tightly. Distant headlights on the ridge. Gabe replied. Looks like vehicles. Could be nothing, but it's worth checking out. Stay put for now, Eli ordered. Don't engage unless you have to. Copy that, Gabe said. Eli lowered the radio, his expression unreadable. He turned to Luke, who was reorganizing his medical supplies. How's the team holding up? Some scrapes and bruises. Nothing serious, Luke replied. But we can't keep this up forever. If Santos is bringing in more men, we're going to need a backup plan. We'll hold, Eli said firmly. We don't have a choice. Luke didn't argue, but his concern was evident. He knew as well as Eli did that their resources were finite. The team was skilled and experienced, but they weren't invincible. The barn door creaked open as Ryan and Gabe returned, their expressions grim. He's secure, Ryan said, brushing dirt off his hands. But he's not going to stay quiet for long. He doesn't need to, Eli said. We've got what we need from him. For now, Gabe added. But if Santos is really coming, we'll need more than just traps and tactics. We'll need numbers. Eli nodded. We'll reach out to the locals. They've been watching this unfold, and they'll want to help. We don't need an army, just enough to hold the line. Ryan raised an eyebrow. You think they're ready for that? They don't have to be, Eli said. We'll make them ready. The team exchanged uneasy glances, the weight of the coming battle settling over them. Despite their exhaustion, there was no hesitation in their resolve. They had faced impossible odds before, and they would do it again. Eli stepped outside. The cool night air a stark contrast to the tension in the barn. Ranger trotted at his side, his tail wagging slightly as he looked up at his owner. Eli crouched and scratched behind the dog's ears, his expression softening for a brief moment. We've got a fight ahead, boy, Eli said quietly. But we'll be ready. As he stood, his gaze drifted to the horizon, where the faint glow of distant headlights marked the cartel's presence. The warning from the captive echoed in his mind, El Diablo is coming for you. Eli's jaw tightened, his resolve hardening. They could come. He and his team would be waiting. The valley was restless. News of the cartel's violent push into the area had spread faster than wildfire. Carried by hushed whispers and worried glances exchanged at the general store and over backyard fences. Families who had lived there for generations were suddenly questioning whether staying was worth the risk. Bill Henderson, a grizzled farmer with weathered hands and a deep love for his land, sat on the porch of the local diner. nervously stirring his coffee. You heard about the explosion near Eli's place, he asked the small group gathered around him. They're not just buying land anymore, they're ready to take it by force. Tommy Thompson, the youngest of the group, barely in his 30s, nodded anxiously. Henderson's up the creek packed up last week. Said they couldn't risk it. We've got kids. Bill. We can't fight these people. Maya Clark, standing off to the side with her arms crossed, listened intently. Her jaw tightened as she stepped forward, her voice cutting through the group's nervous chatter. And where do you think you'll go? Tommy? You think they'll stop if we all run? They'll take this valley. And the next one. And the next. Easy for you to say. Tommy shot back. You don't have a family to think about. Maya's gaze hardened. I don't have a family because the cartel took them from me years ago. I know what they're capable of. But I also know running won't save you. Standing together might. Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Bill looked at her, his expression softening. So, what do we do? We're farmers. Maya. We're not soldiers. No, she agreed, her voice steady. But we can learn. We can watch out for each other. Stay organized. And make this valley a harder target. We've got people who know how to fight, people like Eli. We just need to listen. The mention of Eli Warren drew skeptical looks from some in the group, while his reputation as a quiet and capable farmer was solid. Few knew much about him beyond that. But Maya's confidence in him was unwavering, and her determination began to stir something in the crowd. Meet me at the town hall tomorrow, she said. We'll come up with a plan. If we're going to protect our homes, we need to start now. The group murmured among themselves, hesitant but slowly nodding. Maya's fiery resolve was infectious. And for the first time in days, a faint glimmer of hope crept into their weary faces. Underscore 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 underscore. Later that evening, Maya arrived at Eli's farm, her truck kicking up dust as she pulled into the driveway. The lights from the barn glowed faintly in the distance, and the faint sound of voices carried on the wind. Inside the barn, Eli and his team were gathered with a small group of locals, men and women who had agreed to stay and fight. The group was a mix of ages and backgrounds, from young ranch hands to older farmers like Bill Henderson. Despite their lack of experience, their determination was palpable. Ryan Alvarez stood near a table laden with gear, demonstrating how to properly handle a shotgun. This isn't about being a hero, he said. It's about being smart. Keep your shots controlled and stay behind cover. If you panic, you're a liability. Gabe Knox was on the far side of the barn, showing another group how to spot and call out threats. You don't need a scope to be an extra set of eyes, he explained. Pay attention to movement, patterns, and anything that feels off. Zane Carter was busy setting up a makeshift communications hub, teaching a handful of locals how to use radios and monitor frequencies. Information is everything, he said. If you see something, say something. Don't assume someone else will. Maya entered the barn quietly, watching as Eli moved between the groups, offering guidance where needed. He was calm and composed, his presence a steadying force for the nervous trainees. You're really doing it, she said, stepping up beside him. Eli glanced at her, his expression unreadable. They're scared, but they're willing to fight. That's a good start. It's more than that, Maya said. They trust you. Eli. That means something. He nodded but didn't reply, his focus returning to the training. Maya watched him for a moment before turning her attention to the locals. They were rough around the edges, their movements awkward and hesitant. But there was a spark of determination in their eyes. It reminded her of the fire she'd seen in Eli when she first approached him about the cartel. "They're not soldiers," Maya said softly. "But they'll fight for their homes. That's all we need," Eli replied. Underscore 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 underscore. By the time the training session ended, the locals were tired but visibly more confident. They trickled out of the barn in small groups, thanking the team quietly as they left. Eli stood near the door, watching them go, his mind already on the next steps. Maya lingered, leaning against a post as she studied him. "You're not just some farmer, are you?" Eli gave her a sideways glance. "Never said I was." She smirked. "Fair enough. But whatever you are, I'm glad you're here. Let's just hope it's enough," Eli said. "It will be," she replied firmly. "Because it has to be." The weight of her words settled over them, a reminder of what was at stake. The valley wasn't just a patch of land, it was their home. And they would do whatever it took to protect it. Together, they would face whatever came next. The following morning, Sheriff Mark Cooper's patrol truck rumbled up the gravel path to Eli Warren's farm. The sun had barely risen, casting long shadows over the quiet property. Cooper stepped out, his boots crunching against the ground as he adjusted his belt and looked around, his sharp eyes taking in every detail. He found Eli near the barn, leaning against a post with Ranger at his feet. The dog raised his head, ears perked, but remained still as Cooper approached. "Morning, Sheriff," Eli said, his voice calm but guarded. "Morning," Cooper replied, stopping a few feet away. He glanced toward the barn, where faint voices could be heard, likely the locals still lingering from the early morning training session. "Looks like you've been busy." Eli didn't respond immediately, letting the weight of the statement hang in the air. "Just doing what needs to be done." "That so?" Cooper said, his tone skeptical. "Word around town is you've been rallying folks, teaching them to fight. Sounds like you're gearing up for something big." Eli met his gaze evenly. "The cartel isn't going to back off, Sheriff. You know that as well as I do. These people need to be ready." Cooper crossed his arms, his brow furrowing. "And who made you their general?" "Last I checked, keeping the peace around here was my job." "With all due respect," Eli said, his tone measured but firm, "you can't do this alone. None of us can. I'm not trying to take over your job, but I'm not going to stand by and let this valley fall apart." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "You've been quiet for years, Eli. A model citizen. Now all of a sudden, you're leading the charge against the cartel. Why the change?" Eli's expression remained unreadable. "Because someone has to." Cooper studied him for a long moment, the tension between them palpable. Finally, he sighed and shook his head. "I don't like this, Eli. Not one bit. But I'm not blind. The people trust you, and I can't say I blame them. Just make sure you don't get them killed. They know the risks," Eli said, "and they're willing to take them." Cooper nodded reluctantly, glancing toward the barn again. "If you need anything, you let me know. I may not like it, But I'm not about to let this valley go without a fight. Appreciate it, Eli replied, his voice steady. Without another word, the sheriff turned and walked back to his truck, leaving Eli standing in the morning light. Ranger watched him go before letting out a low huff, as if sensing the sheriff's unease. Eli crouched and scratched behind the dog's ears. He'll come around, he muttered. Eventually. Later that afternoon, Maya Clark stood in the center of the town hall, addressing a growing crowd of locals. The room buzzed with nervous energy, but her voice was steady and confident. We've all seen what's happening, she began, her gaze sweeping over the faces in the room. The cartel isn't going to stop until they've taken everything. But this valley isn't just land, it's our home. And if we stand together, we can protect it. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd, though there were still hesitant glances and whispered doubts. Bill Henderson stood near the back, his arms crossed as he nodded slowly. What about the sheriff? Someone called out. Why isn't he doing more? He's doing what he can, Maya replied. But he can't do it alone. None of us can. That's why we need to work together. Eli and his team are teaching us how to defend ourselves. We just have to be willing to learn. Eli, another voice said. This one filled with skepticism. What makes him qualified to lead this fight? Maya hesitated for a split second before responding. Eli knows what he's doing. He's been through worse than this. And he's still standing. If anyone can help us, it's him. The crowd murmured again, this time with a bit more conviction. Maya could see the flickers of hope in their eyes, and it bolstered her resolve. We've faced challenges before, and we've always come through. This time will be no different. But we have to act now. As the meeting continued, Maya felt a sense of momentum building. The community was scared, but they weren't broken. With the right guidance, she knew they could turn their fear into strength. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Maya drove back to Eli's farm. The barn was quiet now, the locals having finished their training for the day. She stepped inside, her boots echoing softly against the wooden floor. She hadn't planned on exploring, but something about the barn drew her curiosity. Her eyes fell on a partially hidden hatch in the corner, the edges just visible beneath a tarp. Frowning, she pulled the tarp back and lifted the hatch, revealing a ladder leading down into a dimly lit space. Climbing down, she found herself in a small, meticulously organized room. The walls were lined with weapon racks, tactical gear, and stacks of ammunition. A workbench held maps, communication equipment, and a collection of old photographs. One photo, in particular, caught her attention, a younger Eli, dressed in military fatigues, standing alongside a team of men with the words Delta Force scrawled in the corner. Maya's breath caught as the pieces began to fall into place. Eli wasn't just a farmer with a knack for strategy. He was a soldier, a highly trained one. And not just any soldier. The call sign on one of the photographs read Phantom. She had heard the name whispered before, always in hushed tones, as a legend from the shadows of military history. Find what you were looking for, a voice said behind her, startling her. She spun around to see Eli standing at the top of the ladder, his expression unreadable. He descended slowly, his gaze locking onto hers as he reached the bottom. What is all this? Maya demanded, her voice a mix of awe and accusation. Who are you? Really? Eli's jaw tightened as he looked around the room. I'm exactly who I said I was. Someone trying to protect this valley. Don't give me that. Maya snapped. She held up the photograph. You're more than that. You're Phantom. A Delta Force legend. Why didn't you tell anyone? Because it doesn't matter. Eli said evenly. That was a long time ago. It matters. Maya shot back. It matters because people need to know who they're following. They deserve to know the truth. Eli sighed, running a hand through his hair. The truth doesn't change what we're up against. If anything, it complicates things. The cartel doesn't need another reason to come after me. Maya stared at him, her anger giving way to something softer, admiration. Perhaps. Or understanding. You're not just doing this for the valley. Are you? You're doing it because you've seen what happens when people like them win. Eli didn't respond immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter. I've seen enough to know I can't stand by and do nothing. Not this time. Maya nodded slowly, the tension between them easing. Then you'd better start trusting the people who are standing with you. We can't fight this battle alone. Eli met her gaze. A flicker of something unspoken passing between them. I'll think about it. As they climbed back up the ladder, Maya couldn't shake the image of the younger Eli in the photograph. He might not see himself as a hero, but to her, in the valley, he was exactly what they needed. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to our channel, it means so much to us. Now, let's get back to the story. The valley's fragile quiet was shattered as a convoy of black SUVs and heavy-duty trucks rolled in from the south. Miguel El Diablo Santos stepped out of the lead vehicle, his imposing frame silhouetted against the headlights. Dressed in tactical gear that spoke to his military past, Santos exuded a cold, calculated menace. Felix Romero approached him quickly, trying to mask his unease with a confident stride. They're organized, but they're amateurs. Felix began, gesturing toward the valley. Their traps are clever, and they've got some skilled fighters. But nothing we can't handle. Santos shot him a sharp look, his dark eyes piercing. You've underestimated them once already, Felix. That's why I'm here. His voice was low and steady, the kind that didn't need to rise to command attention. We'll do this my way now. Felix swallowed hard but nodded. Of course. We've set up a command post here, he said, pointing to a map on a tablet. From this position, we can control the approach to their farm and keep an eye on the town. Santos took the tablet, studying the terrain with a practiced eye. Good. Deploy the mercenaries along these ridges, he said, marking positions on the map. Their job is to cut off any escape routes and keep the defenders pinned. We'll hit them hard and fast. Break their lines. And finish this. Felix hesitated. And the civilians? Santos's lips curled into a cold smile. Collateral damage. If they want to protect their land, let them die with it. At the farm, Zane Carter was hunched over his console, his headphones on as he intercepted the cartel's communications. The tension in the barn was palpable as he scribbled notes on a pad beside him. We've got a problem, he said finally, pulling off his headphones and turning to Eli Warren. What is it? Eli asked, his voice calm but firm. El Diablo's here. Zane replied. He's brought a lot of firepower. Mercenaries. Military-grade weapons. The works. They're setting up a command post just south of the valley. Eli's jaw tightened. How much time do we have? Not long. Zane said. They're mobilizing now. Looks like they're planning to hit us hard. Eli nodded, his mind already working through the possibilities. He turned to Ryan Alvarez and Gabe Knox, who were gearing up near the workbench. Ryan, reinforce the traps on the south side. Gabe, get back to the ridge. We'll need your eyes on the command post. What about the town? Maya Clark asked, stepping forward. She had been organizing supplies for the locals. But now her focus was entirely on Eli. If they hit us here, they could sweep right into town next. They won't get that far, Eli said. We'll keep them contained. But we need the community ready to move if things go south. Maya nodded, already pulling out her radio. I'll alert the others. We've got shelters set up in the church and the old schoolhouse. If the cartel breaks through, we'll get everyone there. Eli placed a hand on her shoulder briefly, his gaze steady. You're doing good work, Maya. Keep them calm. We'll handle the rest. The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. Ryan worked tirelessly, rigging additional explosives along the southern perimeter. He placed charges in key choke points, using the natural terrain to funnel any approaching forces into kill zones. Gabe returned to his sniper's perch on the ridge, setting up additional spotter scopes and checking his ammunition. Meanwhile, Luke Nash worked with the locals who had volunteered to fight, teaching them how to hold defensive positions and administer basic first aid. Stay low. Stay quiet. And don't panic, he instructed a young ranch hand who was nervously clutching a rifle. If you see movement, call it out. Don't engage unless you have no other choice. Maya moved between the groups, offering words of encouragement and helping to distribute supplies. Despite the tension, she managed to keep the civilians focused and motivated. Her leadership had become a cornerstone of the community's resistance, and even the most skeptical residents were beginning to trust her. By the time the cartel began to move, the team was ready. Gabe was the first to spot them, his scope picking up the glint of headlights in the distance. They're on the move, he reported over the radio. Looks like 3 vehicles, heading toward the south side. Zane's console lit up with activity as he monitored the cartel's communications. They're spreading out, he said, trying to flank us from both the east and west. They're coordinating through a secure channel, but I'm working on jamming it. Eli grabbed his rifle and stepped outside, the cool night air sharpening his focus. Maya, are the civilians in position? Just finished moving the last group to the shelters. Maya replied over the radio. We're as ready as we'll ever be. Good, Eli said. He turned to Ryan, who was crouched near the southern perimeter with his detonator in hand. Hold until they're fully committed. Ryan grinned, his eyes gleaming in the dim light. Don't worry. I'll make it count. As the cartel's vehicles approached, they slowed, their occupants stepping out and fanning into formation. The mercenaries moved with precision, their movements disciplined and methodical. Gabe watched them through his scope, his finger hovering over the trigger. Wait for it. Eli's voice came through the radio. Let them get closer. The cartel forces moved cautiously, their weapons drawn as they scanned the terrain for traps. They had learned from their earlier mistakes, but they hadn't learned enough. When the first man tripped a hidden wire, the resulting explosion sent shockwaves through the night. Ryan triggered a second charge, and then a third, the blasts ripping through the cartel's formation and forcing them into disarray. Gabe picked off stragglers with deadly precision, each shot perfectly timed to maximize the chaos. They're scattering, Gabe reported. But they've got more coming in from the east. Zane, can you confirm? Eli asked. Yeah, Zane replied. I'm seeing heat signatures moving toward the creek bed. Looks like a smaller group, but they're flanking. Eli clicked his radio. Luke, take a team to the east side. Don't let them push through. On it, Luke replied, gathering a handful of locals and moving quickly toward the creek. As the first wave of the cartel's assault faltered, Eli's team regrouped, preparing for the next push. The cartel had underestimated them once again. But the arrival of El Diablo and his mercenaries signaled that the real fight was only just beginning. Eli stood at the center of the action, his calm demeanor masking the storm of thoughts racing through his mind. He knew this was only the beginning, and that their true test was still to come. But for now, the valley held its breath, waiting for the next move. The first explosions had only just faded when the second wave hit. This time, the cartel didn't hold back. Vehicles roared toward the southern perimeter, carrying mercenaries armed with military-grade equipment. El Diablo's influence was evident in their precision and discipline. This was no ragtag group of criminals. These were professionals, and they were coming to claim the valley. Gabe Knox stayed on the ridge, his sniper scope tracking the vehicles as they spread out across the terrain. "They're coming in fast," he reported over the radio. "At least a dozen. Armored truck leading the charge." Eli Warren's voice came back immediately. "Focus on the drivers. Slow them down." "Copy that," Gabe replied, steadying his aim. His first shot rang out, a clean hit that sent the lead truck veering off course and into a ditch. The rest of the convoy adjusted, fanning out to avoid becoming easy targets. Down at the southern perimeter, Ryan Alvarez crouched behind a stack of crates, his detonator ready. He watched as the mercenaries approached, their movements cautious but determined. "Come on. Just a little closer," he muttered, his finger hovering over the trigger. When the first group of mercenaries stepped into the kill zone, Ryan hit the switch. The ground erupted in a series of controlled explosions, throwing dirt, shrapnel, and bodies into the air. The mercenaries scrambled, their formation breaking as they dove for cover. "Got him," Ryan said with a grin, his voice crackling over the radio. "But they're not stopping. Keep them busy," Eli ordered. "We'll reinforce your position." At the creek bed on the eastern side, Luke Nash led a small group of locals who had volunteered to fight. They were nervous but determined, their makeshift weapons a stark contrast to the high-tech gear of the approaching mercenaries. "Stay low and stay quiet," Luke instructed, his voice calm but firm. "Wait for my signal." The group watched as the mercenaries moved through the trees, their movements calculated and methodical. Luke counted at least 10, their rifles sweeping the area as they advanced. He gripped his shotgun tightly, his eyes scanning the terrain for an opening. When the first mercenary stepped into range, Luke fired. The blast was deafening, and the man dropped instantly. The locals followed his lead, their shots breaking the stillness of the night. 2 more mercenaries fell before the rest managed to return fire. The firefight was chaotic, the mercenaries' superior training clashing with the locals' determination. Luke moved with precision, taking out another enemy before calling for a retreat. "Fall back to the second line," he shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. The locals obeyed, retreating to a more defensible position farther up the creek. Luke covered their movements, his shotgun barking with each shot. The mercenaries pressed forward, but the traps set by Ryan slowed their advance, buying the locals precious time. "We're holding for now," Luke reported over the radio. "But they're pushing hard." "Understood," Eli replied. "Reinforcements are on the way." Back at the farm, Zane Carter was working frantically at his console, intercepting the cartel's communications. His fingers flew across the keyboard as he decoded messages and fed false information into their channels. "They're trying to coordinate another push," Zane said, his voice steady despite the tension. "I'm feeding them bad intel, but it won't hold them for long. Do what you can," Eli said. He turned to Maya Clark, who was busy organizing supplies for the next wave of civilians to be evacuated. "Maya, how's the town?" Quiet for now, she replied. The shelters are secure. But people are scared. They're looking to us for answers. Then give them something to believe in. Eli said. We can't let fear take over. Maya nodded. Her resolve hardening. She grabbed her radio and began coordinating with the volunteers, ensuring everyone knew their roles. Despite the chaos, she moved with purpose. Her presence a calming force for those around her. The next wave came just before dawn. The cartel, frustrated by their earlier setbacks, launched an all-out assault. Armored trucks barreled toward the farm, their mounted guns spitting fire as they advanced. Mercenaries followed on foot, their movements disciplined and relentless. Gabe was the first to engage, his sniper rifle taking out the gunner on the lead truck. That's one, he muttered, quickly reloading for the next shot. Ryan, positioned near the barn, activated another series of explosives. The blasts sent dirt and debris flying, forcing the mercenaries to scatter. They're still coming, he shouted over the radio. Hold the line, Eli replied. We can't let them break through. Eli moved to the front, his rifle steady as he fired into the advancing forces. He worked in tandem with Ryan, coordinating their movements to maximize the effectiveness of their traps and firepower. Despite the overwhelming odds, the team fought with precision and determination, their years of experience shining through. At the creek bed, Luke and his group were under heavy fire. The mercenaries had regrouped and were pressing hard, their superior firepower forcing the locals to retreat further. Luke gritted his teeth, his mind racing as he tried to come up with a plan. Zane, any chance you can give us some breathing room? He asked over the radio. Working on it, Zane replied. He tapped a few keys, activating a hidden speaker system near the mercenaries' position. The sound of gunfire and shouting erupted from the speakers, confusing the attackers and causing them to hesitate. Luke seized the opportunity, leading his group in a counterattack. They moved quickly, taking out 2 more mercenaries before retreating to a safer position. Thanks, Zane, Luke said, his voice tight but grateful. Anytime, Zane replied. Just don't get yourself killed. As the battle raged on, the cartel's forces began to falter. The team's tactics, combined with the locals' resilience, had taken a toll. Bodies littered the ground, and the once confident mercenaries were now hesitant, their movements slower and less coordinated. Eli noticed the shift and seized the moment. They're breaking, he said over the radio. Push them back. The team responded immediately, their renewed efforts driving the mercenaries into full retreat. Gabe picked off the stragglers as they fled, his sniper rifle silencing the last of the resistance. By the time the sun rose, the battlefield was quiet. The cartel's forces had been repelled, their assault a costly failure. Eli and his team regrouped near the barn, their exhaustion evident but their resolve unshaken. We did it, Ryan said, slumping against a crate. We held them off. For now, Eli said, his gaze fixed on the horizon. But this isn't over. Maya stepped forward, her expression a mix of relief and determination. What's next? Eli looked at her, his eyes hard. We prepare for their next move, because they'll be back. And when they come, we'll be ready. The night air was heavy with smoke and the acrid scent of gunpowder as Eli Warren led his team toward the cartel's mobile command post. Guided by the intelligence Zane Carter had intercepted, they moved silently through the dense woods, each step calculated and deliberate. Gabe Knox took point, his rifle raised as he scanned the terrain for threats. They've pulled back most of their forces to regroup. Zane's voice crackled softly over the radio. The command post is lightly guarded. Santos didn't expect anyone to come for him. Perfect, Eli replied. His tone calm but determined. We'll hit them hard and fast. Ryan, you've got the explosives? Always, Ryan Alvarez said with a smirk. His bag of charges slung over his shoulder. This command post won't be standing when we're done. Luke Nash, bringing up the rear, glanced over his shoulder at the group of locals who had volunteered to join the strike team. They were nervous but resolute, their eyes betraying a mix of fear and determination. Stick close and follow our lead, Luke said, his voice steady. We'll get through this. As they approached the clearing where the command post was stationed, Gabe raised a fist, signaling for the group to stop. He crouched low, his rifle trained on the 2 guards standing near a cluster of vehicles. 2 guards, he murmured into his radio. Both armed. But they're not paying attention. Take them out quietly, Eli ordered. Gabe lined up his shot, exhaling slowly before pulling the trigger. The first guard dropped silently, his body crumpling to the ground. The second guard turned, startled. But before he could react, Gabe fired again, ending the threat. All clear, Gabe said, motioning for the team to move forward. The command post was a hastily assembled collection of tents, vehicles, and communication equipment. Eli's eyes scanned the setup, noting the weak points and potential targets. Ryan, plant the charges on the vehicles and the comms equipment. We'll cover you. On it, Ryan replied, moving quickly but carefully as he began setting up the explosives. The rest of the team spread out, taking defensive positions around the perimeter. Inside the largest tent, Miguel El Diablo Santos stood with Felix Romero, poring over a map of the valley. Felix's face was tight with frustration, his pride wounded from the failed assault. We underestimated them, Felix admitted, his voice bitter. They're better than we thought. Santos's expression was cold and unreadable as he studied the map. They're resourceful, he said finally. But they're not invincible. We've seen their tactics. Next time, we'll adapt. Before Felix could respond, an explosion rocked the clearing, sending a shockwave through the air. The tent's walls shook. And outside, the night lit up with fire as Ryan's charges detonated, destroying the vehicles and equipment. Santos grabbed his rifle, his eyes narrowing. We're under attack. Eli and his team moved quickly, using the confusion to their advantage. Gabe picked off the remaining guards one by one, his sniper rifle ensuring no one escaped. Zane, stationed a safe distance away with his laptop, fed real-time intel to the team, directing their movements and jamming the cartel's remaining communications. They're in complete disarray, Zane reported. Santos and Felix are holed up in the main tent. Eli nodded, signaling for the team to advance. Keep them pinned. Ryan, are the charges ready? Just need another minute, Ryan replied, securing the final explosive to the base of a large communications tower. You've got 30 seconds, Eli said. We don't have time for more. As Ryan finished his work, Eli led the group toward the main tent. He moved with purpose, his rifle at the ready as he entered the makeshift command center. Santos and Felix turned at the sound, their weapons drawn. But Eli's team had the advantage. Drop them, Eli ordered, his voice cold and commanding. For a moment, Santos hesitated, his eyes narrowing as he sized up Eli. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he placed his rifle on the table. Felix followed suit, though his expression was one of barely concealed fury. "You've made a mistake coming here," Santos said, his tone icy. "You think this changes anything?" "This changes everything," Eli replied, stepping closer. "You came into our valley, threatened our people, and thought you could take whatever you wanted. That ends now." Santos smirked, his confidence unshaken. "You're a soldier. I can see it in your eyes. You know how this works. You might win today, but this isn't over. It's never over." Eli's gaze didn't waver. "You're right. It's not over. But you won't be the one calling the shots anymore." Before Santos could respond, Ryan's voice came through the radio. "Charges are set. We've got about 90 seconds before this place goes up." Eli stepped back, motioning for his team to retreat. "Let's move." The group exited the tent, leaving Santos and Felix behind. The cartel leader watched them go, his expression dark and calculating. As the first flames began to lick at the edges of the clearing, Santos turned to Felix. "Get the vehicles. We're pulling back." The team made it back to the tree line just as the explosives detonated. The command post erupted in a series of fireballs, the force of the blast shaking the ground. Eli and his team watched from a safe distance, their expressions grim but resolute. "They'll think twice before coming back here," Gabe said, lowering his rifle. "For now," Eli replied. "But Santos isn't done. He'll regroup and come back stronger." Maya Clark stepped forward, her face lit by the glow of the burning wreckage. "Then we'll be ready. Whatever it takes." Eli glanced at her, a flicker of admiration in his eyes. "We will." Back at the cartel's retreat point, Santos and Felix regrouped with the surviving mercenaries. The mood was tense, the air thick with smoke and frustration. Santos stood with his arms crossed, his expression dark as he surveyed the damage. "They got lucky," Felix said, his voice bitter. Next time, we'll finish this." Santos interrupted, his voice cold and final. "They think they've won, but they haven't seen what I'm capable of. We'll burn that valley to the ground." Felix nodded, though his confidence seemed shaken. "What's the plan?" Santos's lips curled into a dangerous smile. "We regroup. We rearm. And we remind them why they call me El Diablo." As the cartel leader turned to face the night, his vow of revenge hung heavy in the air, a promise of the battles still to come. The valley was alive with activity. What had once been a quiet community of farmers and ranchers had transformed into a hive of determined preparation. Eli Warren stood in the center of the makeshift training ground near his barn, watching as groups of locals worked under the guidance of his team. The tension from recent battles had shifted into focused energy, and the once fractured valley was now united in purpose. A group of younger residents clustered around Eli as he demonstrated the proper way to hold a rifle. Most of them were in their 20s, their faces a mix of nervousness and resolve. "Grip it like this," Eli said, his tone calm but firm. He adjusted the hands of a young man named Tommy, who had stepped forward to take the first lesson. Tommy nodded, his movements stiff but determined. "Like this?" "Better," Eli replied. "But loosen your shoulders. Tension will throw off your aim. Relax. Focus on your breathing. And let the rifle do the work." Tommy exhaled slowly, his shoulders relaxing as he raised the rifle again. When he pulled the trigger, the shot hit the target dead center. The group erupted into cheers, their spirits lifting at the small victory. "Not bad," Eli said with a faint smile. "Now do it again." The rest of the group watched intently as Tommy repeated the process, his confidence growing with each shot. Eli stepped back, letting them practice as he observed. He could see the spark of determination in their eyes, a spark he recognized from his own younger days. These weren't soldiers, but they were learning quickly. And more importantly, they were learning to rely on each other. Nearby, Maya Clark was leading a drill with another group. She stood in front of a chalkboard propped up against a fence, using it to map out escape routes and defensive positions. If the cartel breaks through, she explained, you need to know exactly where to go and what to do. Stick to the plan. And don't try to be a hero. A hand went up in the crowd. It belonged to Bill Henderson, the older farmer who had been one of the first to step forward during the community meeting. What if we're cut off? He asked. What's the backup plan? Maya nodded, appreciating the question. Good point. If that happens, move toward higher ground. We've set up signal flares at key locations, look for those and regroup there. And remember, this isn't just about fighting. Sometimes the best defense is staying hidden and staying alive. The group murmured their agreement, and Maya could see their confidence growing. She turned to Zane Carter, who was setting up a small communications hub nearby. Zane, want to show them how to use the radios? Zane looked up from his equipment, giving her a nod. All right. Listen up, he said, holding up one of the handheld radios. These are simple to use, but you need to follow protocol. Keep your messages short and clear. Don't clog the channel with unnecessary chatter. And always sign off with your location so we know where you are. He demonstrated, speaking into the radio and receiving a response from Gabe Knox, who was stationed on the ridge. The locals watched closely, asking questions and taking notes. By the time Zane finished, they looked more confident in their ability to communicate effectively under pressure. As the day went on, the physical defenses around the valley took shape. Ryan Alvarez worked tirelessly with a group of volunteers to reinforce barricades and set up new traps. They dug trenches, fortified weak points along the perimeter, and installed motion sensors connected to Zane's surveillance system. This isn't just about stopping them, Ryan explained as he demonstrated how to arm a tripwire. It's about slowing them down and making them second-guess every step they take. The more time they spend worrying about what's ahead, the less time they have to focus on us. The volunteers nodded, following his instructions carefully. Ryan could see the determination in their faces, and it fueled his own resolve. These people had been scared and uncertain only days ago, but now they were ready to fight for their homes. The transformation wasn't just physical, it was emotional. The community, once fractured by fear, was now bonded by a shared sense of purpose. Families who had considered leaving were now staying, their resolve strengthened by the progress they saw around them. During a break, a group of locals gathered near the barn, sharing stories and laughing over cups of coffee. The tension that had gripped the valley was still present, but it no longer felt insurmountable. Eli watched from a distance, a rare sense of pride flickering in his chest. This wasn't just about fighting back, it was about building something stronger than fear. You've done good here, Maya said, stepping up beside him. Her tone was light, but there was admiration in her eyes. They trust you. Eli shook his head slightly. They trust each other. That's what matters. And you gave them the chance to do that, Maya said firmly. Don't sell yourself short. Eli didn't respond, but her words stayed with him as he turned back to watch the community he had come to care for more than he ever expected. That evening, the team gathered in the barn to review the day's progress. Zane displayed a map of the valley on his laptop, marking the locations of the new defenses and communication points. We're in good shape, he said. But we can't let our guard down. The cartel will be watching. Looking for weaknesses. They'll test us. Eli agreed. It's what I'd do in their position. We need to be ready for anything. Then we keep working. Gabe said. Cleaning his rifle. We've made it this far. No reason to stop now. Maya nodded. Her gaze steady. And the community's with us. They're not just fighting for themselves, they're fighting for each other. Eli looked around the room. His team and the Valley's defenders united in their resolve. For the first time in a long time, he allowed himself a moment of hope. They weren't just defending a patch of land, they were building something worth protecting. The air was tense as Eli Warren stood on the ridge with Gabe Knox, their binoculars scanning the valley below. Zane Carter's voice crackled over the radio. Movement at the tree line on the south side. Heat signatures, 5. Maybe 6. They're testing us. Eli lowered his binoculars. His jaw tightening. They're looking for weak points, he said. Let's make sure they don't find any. Gabe adjusted his rifle scope, locking onto one of the figures in the distance. They're cautious. Not rushing in. Mercenaries. Not cartel regulars. Santos is getting smarter. Eli nodded. Don't engage yet. Let's see what they're after. Down at the southern perimeter, Ryan Alvarez was crouched behind a newly reinforced barricade, watching the intruders through a pair of night vision goggles. He tapped his radio. They're moving in pairs. Checking the traps. Looks like they're trying to map out our defenses. Let them come closer. Eli's voice replied. We need them to overcommit. Maya Clark stood nearby with a group of volunteers. Their radios silent as they waited for orders. She watched Ryan carefully, her fingers gripping her own rifle tightly. What's the plan if they find a way through? She asked, her voice low. They won't, Ryan said confidently. Not with what we've got waiting for them. The mercenaries crept closer. Their movements slow and deliberate. One of them paused, kneeling to examine a tripwire buried in the dirt. Ryan's grip on the detonator tightened. But he didn't press it. Not yet. Hold. Eli's voice commanded over the radio. Let them think they've got the upper hand. The lead mercenary signaled to the others, pointing out the tripwire. They began marking the area with small flags, clearly intending to report their findings back to Santos. Ryan smirked. Big mistake. When the mercenaries crossed into the second perimeter, Ryan hit the switch. A series of controlled explosions erupted, sending dirt and debris flying. The mercenaries were thrown into chaos, their formation breaking as they scrambled for cover. Now! Eli's voice rang out over the radio. Gabe fired the first shot, dropping one of the mercenaries as they tried to retreat. The rest of the team moved into action, coordinating their response with precision. Zane disrupted the mercenaries' communications, flooding their frequencies with static and false instructions. Maya and her group flanked the remaining intruders, cutting off their escape route. The skirmish was over in minutes. The surviving mercenaries threw down their weapons and raised their hands, their confidence shattered by the community's coordinated response. Ryan approached one of them, his expression cold. Next time, tell Santos we're not playing games. Eli stepped forward, his gaze sweeping over the scene. Secure them, he ordered. We'll turn them over to the sheriff. Back at the farm, the team gathered in the barn to debrief. Zane was hunched over his laptop, replaying footage from the surveillance cameras. They weren't just testing us, he said. They were mapping our defenses. If they got out of here alive, Santos would have had everything he needed. But they didn't, Gabe said, cleaning his rifle. And now they know what happens when they try. Eli nodded, his expression grim. This was just the beginning. Santos isn't going to back down. And neither are we. Double the patrols and reinforce the weak points they targeted. We need to stay one step ahead. As the team dispersed to carry out their tasks, Maya lingered, her brow furrowed. They're not giving up, she said quietly. What happens when Santos decides to escalate? Eli met her gaze, his eyes steady. Then we escalate. 2. Whatever it takes. The next day, an unfamiliar car rolled into the valley, its sleek black exterior standing out against the dusty roads. The driver stepped out. A woman in her late 30s with sharp features and a badge clipped to her belt. Agent Sofia Martinez adjusted her blazer, her eyes scanning the town with practiced precision. Sheriff Mark Cooper met her on the steps of the town hall, his expression wary. Agent Martinez. Isn't it? What brings the FBI to our neck of the woods? Martinez gave him a tight smile. We've been monitoring cartel activity in the region. Your valley's been a hot spot lately. And we're curious as to why. Cooper hesitated, his mind racing. Just farmers protecting their land, he said carefully. The cartel's been trying to push us around. But we've been holding our own. Martinez raised an eyebrow. Holding your own? Against one of the most dangerous cartels in the country? That's impressive. Sheriff. Cooper sighed, knowing she wasn't going to be satisfied with vague answers. Look. The people here are tough. They've come together to protect what's theirs. That's all there is to it. Martinez said, her tone skeptical. Mind if I take a look around? Cooper forced a polite smile. Be my guest. Word of Martinez's arrival spread quickly, reaching Eli and the team by midday. Maya found Eli near the barn, her expression tight with concern. FBI's here, she said. Agent Martinez. She's asking questions about the cartel and about us. Eli's jaw tightened. What's she looking for? Answers. Maya replied. And she's not the type to back off until she gets them. Eli nodded, his mind already racing. We need to stay ahead of her. If she starts poking around too much, she could blow everything we've built here. Think she's a threat? Maya asked. Not yet, Eli said. But we can't take any chances. Martinez's investigation brought her to Eli's farm later that afternoon. She stepped out of her car, her sharp eyes immediately taking in the reinforced barricades and the faint sound of drills coming from the barn. Eli stepped out to meet her, his expression unreadable. Agent Martinez, he said, his tone calm. What can I do for you? Just following up on some reports, she replied, her gaze unwavering. Heard you've been having some trouble with the cartel. Eli nodded. We've had our share of problems. But we're managing. Managing. Martinez repeated, her tone laced with curiosity. From what I've heard, you've been doing a lot more than that. Coordinated defenses. Tactical maneuvers. Even intercepting cartel communications. That's not exactly standard farmer behavior. Eli's expression didn't waver. We're protecting our homes. People will do amazing things when their backs are against the wall. Martinez studied him for a long moment, her sharp eyes searching his face. Finally, she smiled faintly. Fair enough. But if there's anything you're not telling me, now's the time. Eli didn't flinch. Everything we've done has been to protect this valley. Nothing more. Martinez nodded, though her expression suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. Well, if you think of anything, you know where to find me. As she walked back to her car, Eli's shoulders relaxed slightly, though the tension in his jaw remained. He watched her drive away, knowing that her presence in the valley was another challenge they would have to navigate. That evening, Eli called a meeting in the barn. The team and key members of the community gathered around the map of the valley, their expressions serious. "Martinez isn't going away," Eli said, his tone firm. "We need to be careful. If she starts digging too deep, she could expose everything." "What do we do?" Ryan asked. "We stick to the story," Eli replied. "We're farmers protecting our land. Nothing more." "And if she doesn't buy it?" Gabe asked. Eli's gaze hardened. "Then we make sure she doesn't find anything." The room fell silent, the weight of the situation pressing down on everyone. Maya finally spoke, her voice steady. "We've come this far. We can handle her, just like we've handled everything else." Eli nodded, his resolve unshaken. "We will. But we need to stay sharp. Santos is still out there, and he's not going to wait for us to get comfortable." The team nodded in agreement, their focus shifting back to the map. They had built something strong in the valley, a shield against the chaos that threatened to consume them. But they knew the fight was far from over. The valley was eerily silent as the moon hung high over the mountains, casting long shadows across the terrain. Eli Warren stood near the barn, binoculars pressed to his eyes as he scanned the dark ridges. The air carried a tension that wasn't just imagined. Zane Carter had intercepted enough cartel chatter to confirm what they were all waiting for. Miguel El Diablo Santos was coming. And this time, he was throwing everything he had into the fight. "They're moving." Zane's voice crackled over the radio, breaking the stillness. "For vehicles on the south road. Heat signatures indicate they've got more on foot trailing behind." Eli lowered the binoculars and turned to his team, who were gathered nearby. Ryan Alvarez was checking his detonators one last time, while Gabe Knox stood with his rifle slung over his shoulder, his sharp eyes focused on the horizon. Luke Nash knelt next to a crate, reorganizing medical supplies in preparation for the inevitable injuries. "They've brought everything," Zane continued. "Thermal imaging shows at least 30 strong, some of them heavily armed. And based on their patterns, these are trained mercenaries, not the usual cartel soldiers." Eli's jaw tightened. "They're looking to overwhelm us. They're not planning to leave anything behind." Ryan grinned, his confidence unshaken. "Then we give them a reason to regret coming here." "Focus," Eli said, his voice calm but commanding. "Ryan, double-check the charges on the south perimeter. Gabe, I want you covering the ridge like your life depends on it, because it does." "Got it," Gabe said, already moving toward his sniper's nest. "Luke, you're on medical triage. Coordinate with the locals who've been trained to assist." Eli continued. "Maya, how are the civilians?" Maya Clark, who had been standing near the makeshift command center, stepped forward. "We've moved everyone to the shelters in the church and the schoolhouse," she said. "They're nervous, but they're ready. I've got volunteers monitoring each location in case we need to move them again." "Good," Eli said. "Keep them steady. Their morale is just as important as their safety." Maya nodded, her expression resolute. "What about you?" Eli's gaze drifted toward the dark horizon. "I'll be wherever I'm needed." As the team dispersed, the valley came alive with quiet but purposeful activity. Volunteers fortified barricades, while others double-checked supplies and weapons. The sense of community that had grown over the past weeks was palpable. And it was this unity that gave them all hope, even in the face of what felt like an insurmountable threat. From his perch on the ridge, Gabe had a clear view of the approaching convoy. Through his scope, he could make out the lead vehicle, a heavily armored truck with a mounted machine gun. Behind it, 3 more vehicles carried additional troops, their silhouettes illuminated by the faint glow of headlights bouncing off the terrain. Convoy is 2 clicks out. Gabe reported over the radio. They've got a gun truck in the lead. That's priority 1. Copy that. Eli replied. Zane, can you disrupt their comms? Already on it. Zane said, typing furiously at his laptop. Jamming their main frequency now. If they try to coordinate, they'll just hear static. Ryan's voice came through next. Charges on the south perimeter are set. Just give me the word. Eli glanced toward the southern edge of the property, where Ryan had strategically placed explosives to funnel the attackers into narrower kill zones. Hold until they're fully committed. We want them to think they've got the upper hand. El Diablo sat in the passenger seat of the lead vehicle, his expression unreadable as he watched the dark valley ahead. Felix Romero sat behind him, nervously tapping his knee as he studied a map illuminated by the vehicle's interior light. They'll be waiting for us, Felix said, his voice tense. Their defenses will be strong. They're farmers playing soldier. Santos replied coldly. Strong defenses won't matter if we hit them hard enough. Felix nodded but didn't look convinced. We should be careful. They've surprised us before. Santos turned to him, his eyes narrowing. They won't surprise us again. This time, we burn everything. The first vehicle crossed into the valley just before midnight, its engine growling as it navigated the uneven terrain. The convoy followed closely behind, the mercenaries on foot spreading out into flanking positions. Through his scope, Gabe could see their precise movements, each one deliberate and calculated. They're trained, he muttered to himself before speaking into the radio. They've split into 2 groups, one staying with the convoy, the other moving on foot toward the creek bed. Eli's voice came through. Gabe, prioritize the gun truck. Zane, monitor their movements and alert the east side. Copy that. Zane replied. The gun truck rolled into range, its mounted weapon swiveling as the operator scanned the area. Gabe steadied his breathing, his crosshairs settling on the operator. Taking the shot, he said quietly. The suppressed rifle cracked, and the operator slumped forward. The truck jolted to a stop as the driver panicked, and Gabe quickly shifted his aim, taking out the driver with another precise shot. Gun truck's disabled, Gabe reported. But they're not stopping. The remaining vehicles halted, and the mercenaries disembarked, their rifles raised as they advanced on foot. Ryan's voice came through the radio. They're in the zone. Permission to light 'em up? Do it, Eli ordered. Ryan hit the detonator, and the night erupted in a series of controlled explosions. The first blast flipped one of the vehicles, its passengers thrown into the air like rag dolls. The second and third charges detonated in quick succession, creating chaos as the mercenaries scrambled for cover. They're scattering, Ryan said, a grin in his voice. That ought to slow them down. Not for long, Eli said. Maya, get your group ready. They'll be pushing toward the barn next. Already moving, Maya replied, leading a group of volunteers toward the northern perimeter. At the command post, Zane monitored the chaos through his surveillance feeds. The mercenaries' movements were erratic, their formation breaking as they struggled to regroup. He jammed their comms again, feeding them false coordinates that led them further into the traps. They're completely disoriented, Zane said. But there's another group coming in from the east. Looks like they're trying to flank. Luke, that's your sector, Eli said over the radio. Hold them off as long as you can. On it. Luke replied. His voice steady despite the mounting tension. As the battle unfolded, Eli moved from one position to the next, his rifle always at the ready. He directed the defense with precision, his commands keeping the team and the locals coordinated despite the chaos. The cartel's forces were relentless, their numbers and firepower creating a seemingly endless wave of attacks. But the valley held. Every trap, every defensive position, every lesson they'd learned over the past weeks was paying off. The community, once fractured and afraid, was now a unified force, a shield against the darkness threatening to consume them. As Eli crouched behind a barricade, reloading his rifle, he glanced at Maya, who was rallying her group of volunteers nearby. Her voice was strong, her determination unshakable. In that moment, Eli knew they had a chance. The cartel may have brought their best, but the valley had something stronger: unity, resilience, and the will to fight for their home. They're not getting through, Eli muttered to himself, his resolve hardening. Not tonight. The silence of the valley shattered as the cartel's assault erupted in a symphony of chaos. Heavy gunfire echoed through the night, joined by the deafening roar of engines and the intermittent thunder of explosions. Eli Warren stood at the heart of the defensive line, issuing commands over the radio as the first wave of mercenaries pushed forward. South side taking heavy fire. Ryan Alvarez reported from his position near the barn. They're trying to punch through, but the traps are holding for now. Hold your ground, Eli responded, his voice calm despite the intensity around him. Gabe, give Ryan some cover. Zane, what's the situation on the east? Zane Carter's voice crackled over the radio. Second group moving through the creek bed. Looks like they're testing our flank. Luke's team is holding, but they're stretched thin. Maya, Eli called, turning toward her position. Can you take a group to reinforce the east? Maya Clark was already on the move, rallying a small team of volunteers. On it, she replied, her voice firm. We'll hold the line. At the southern perimeter, Ryan crouched behind a barricade, his rifle raised as he scanned the shadows for movement. The traps he'd set had slowed the cartel's advance, but the sheer number of attackers was beginning to overwhelm the defenses. Explosions lit up the night as mercenaries triggered tripwires. But for every one that fell, two more seemed to take their place. Reloading, Ryan shouted, ducking behind cover as bullets tore through the air above him. He fumbled with his ammunition, his hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline coursing through his veins. Gabe Knox's calm voice came through the radio. Got you covered. From his perch on the ridge, Gabe picked off the advancing mercenaries with precision, his sniper rifle cracking like a metronome. Each shot found its mark, keeping the attackers pinned and buying Ryan precious seconds to regroup. Thanks, Gabe, Ryan muttered, slamming a fresh magazine into his rifle. He rose from cover, firing into the darkness as the next wave approached. On the eastern flank, Luke Nash and his group of locals were locked in a fierce firefight. The creek bed, once a quiet stretch of rocky terrain, had become a battleground. The mercenaries advanced in tight formation, their military training evident in their disciplined movements. Hold the line, Luke shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. He fired a shotgun, the blast taking down one of the attackers as the others scattered for cover. Beside him, a young ranch hand named Billy fired his rifle with surprising accuracy, his determination outweighing his fear. They're regrouping, Billy called, pointing toward a cluster of mercenaries huddled behind a fallen tree. Luke glanced over his shoulder as Maya and her group arrived, their weapons at the ready. About time you got here, he said, his tone light despite the tension. "Thought you could use some backup," Maya replied, taking up a position beside him. She gestured for her team to spread out. Their movements quick and coordinated. "We've got your flank. Let's push them back." With Maya's reinforcements, the tide began to turn. The combined firepower of the two groups forced the mercenaries into a retreat. Their attempts to flank the valley thwarted. Luke grinned as the last of the attackers disappeared into the shadows. "That's what I'm talking about. Don't get too comfortable," Maya warned, her gaze scanning the horizon. This was just a probe. They'll be back. At the command post, Zane monitored the battle through his array of surveillance cameras and intercepted communications. The screens in front of him showed the chaos unfolding across the valley. Each feat a testament to the team's resilience and the community's determination. "They're shifting tactics," Zane reported. "Looks like they're focusing on the south and west now. Trying to divide our attention." Eli's voice came through the radio. "Can you disrupt them?" "Already on it," Zane replied, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He fed false coordinates into the cartel's communication channels, leading one group of mercenaries straight into a dead-end canyon. That should slow them down. Eli's response was immediate. "Good work. Keep me updated." The west side of the valley erupted in a new wave of violence as the cartel launched a coordinated assault. Explosions rocked the barricades, and gunfire lit up the night as the defenders scrambled to hold their positions. Eli moved quickly through the chaos, issuing commands and providing cover fire where needed. "Fall back to the second line," he shouted, his voice cutting through the din. The defenders obeyed, retreating to a more secure position as the first line of barricades was overrun. A group of mercenaries advanced, their movements precise as they closed in on the defenders. Eli fired his rifle, taking down two of them before they could reach the barricade. "Ryan, we need explosives on the west side now." "On my way," Ryan called, sprinting toward the embattled area with a satchel of charges slung over his shoulder. He slid into position beside Eli, his breath coming in short bursts. "Where do you want them?" Eli pointed to a narrow choke point between two large boulders. "There. If they push through, we need to bottleneck them." Ryan nodded, setting to work with practiced efficiency. As the mercenaries pressed forward, he armed the charges, his hands moving quickly despite the danger. "Charges set," he said, backing away. "You want the honors?" Eli shook his head. "Your traps. Your call." Ryan grinned, his finger hovering over the detonator. "Hope they like fireworks." The explosion was deafening, the blast sending a shockwave through the valley. The mercenaries nearest to the choke point were thrown backward, their advance halted as debris rained down around them. The survivors retreated, their confidence shaken. "Nice work," Eli said, clapping Ryan on the shoulder. "Let's keep it that way." The battle raged on through the night, each wave of attackers testing the valley's defenses. The cartel's superior firepower and training pushed the defenders to their limits, but the team's tactics and the community's determination held firm. Every skirmish, every trap, every coordinated counterattack chipped away at the cartel's momentum. As dawn approached, the valley was scarred but still standing. The team regrouped near the barn, their faces marked with exhaustion but their spirits unbroken. Eli looked around at his team and the volunteers, his gaze lingering on Maya, Ryan, Gabe, Zane, and Luke. They had fought harder than anyone could have expected, and they had held their ground. "They're not done yet," Eli said, his voice steady despite the weight of the battle. "But neither are we." The first light of dawn painted the valley in a pale orange glow. revealing the aftermath of the night's relentless battle. The ground was littered with debris, smoldering remnants of the cartel's vehicles, and the scars of countless explosions. Despite the chaos, the defenders remained vigilant, their focus unbroken. Eli Warren stood on a ridge overlooking the battlefield, his sharp eyes scanning the terrain below. He could see the cartel forces regrouping in the distance, their numbers still daunting but visibly diminished. "They're pulling back for now," he said over the radio. "But don't let your guard down. This isn't over." "Copy that." Zane Carter replied from the command post. "I've got eyes on their movements. Looks like they're trying to re-establish communication. They're scrambling." "That's our opening," Eli said. "Let's use it." Gabe Knox adjusted the scope on his rifle, settling into his perch high above the valley. He had been watching the cartel's movements throughout the night, his precision shots keeping them off balance and preventing them from gaining any significant ground. Now, as the sun rose, he saw an opportunity. "They've got a new command point," Gabe said over the radio, his voice steady. "Looks like a temporary setup near the western edge of the valley. A few trucks. Maybe a dozen guys. Take out their leadership," Eli ordered. "We'll keep the rest occupied." Gabe smirked, his finger resting lightly on the trigger. "With pleasure." Through his scope, Gabe focused on a man standing near one of the trucks, issuing commands to the others. His calm breathing and steady hands made the shot effortless. The rifle cracked, and the man dropped instantly. The rest of the cartel forces scattered, their coordination crumbling as panic set in. "One down," Gabe reported, moving to the next. At the southern perimeter, Maya Clark led a group of volunteers in a counterattack against the remaining cartel forces. The locals, once hesitant and untrained, moved with surprising confidence and precision. They used the terrain to their advantage, striking from cover and quickly retreating before the cartel could respond. "Stay low and keep moving," Maya instructed, her voice firm but encouraging. "Don't give them an easy target." Billy, the young ranch hand who had fought alongside Luke Nash at the creek, grinned as he reloaded his rifle. "They're running scared now. Don't get cocky," Maya warned, though she couldn't deny the pride she felt watching the group she had helped train hold their own. "We're not done yet." The cartel forces at the southern edge began to falter as the locals pressed their advantage. Traps set by Ryan Alvarez earlier in the night continued to disrupt their movements, forcing them into exposed positions where they were easily picked off. "South side's clearing out," Maya reported over the radio. "We've got them on the run." "Good work," Eli replied. "Keep pushing. Let's make sure they don't come back." Ryan, meanwhile, had regrouped with Luke and another team at the western flank. Despite the injuries he had sustained earlier, his determination remained unshaken. He knelt beside a barricade, carefully arming another set of explosives. "These should take care of the stragglers," Ryan said, glancing at Luke. "Think you can hold them off while I set the rest?" Luke grinned, raising his shotgun. "You just worry about the boom. I've got this." As Ryan worked, Luke and the others laid down suppressing fire, keeping the cartel forces pinned. The sound of gunfire echoed through the valley, a constant reminder of the high stakes of their fight. But the defenders held their ground, their determination outweighing their exhaustion. When the explosives were ready, Ryan gave a sharp whistle to signal the retreat. The group fell back to a safer position just as the charges detonated, sending a shockwave through the enemy ranks. The remaining cartel forces scattered, their morale shattered. "West side's clear," Ryan reported, his voice filled with satisfaction. They're not getting through here. Nice work, Eli said. Regroup at the barn. We're not done yet. Zane monitored the situation from the command post, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he continued to disrupt the cartel's communications. Every intercepted message, every false coordinate he fed them, added to their confusion and chaos. They're in full retreat, Zane said over the radio. Whatever's left of their forces is heading back toward their temporary command post. That's where we'll finish this, Eli replied. Maya, Gabe, Ryan, Luke, rally your teams and meet me at the western edge. We're taking the fight to them. The final push came as the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows over the valley. The defenders moved swiftly and silently, using the terrain to their advantage as they closed in on the cartel's temporary command post. Eli led the way, his rifle at the ready, his mind focused on the task ahead. When they reached the edge of the camp, Gabe took up a position on a nearby ridge, his sniper rifle trained on the enemy. I've got eyes on their leader, he said. Looks like Santos isn't here. But whoever's running this operation isn't going anywhere. Take them out, Eli ordered. Ryan, get those charges ready. We're ending this. The team moved into position, their actions coordinated and precise. Maya led her group in a flanking maneuver, cutting off the cartel's escape route. Luke and his team provided cover fire as Ryan planted explosives around the command post. The cartel forces, already weakened and demoralized, were no match for the defenders' coordinated assault. As the final charges detonated, the camp erupted into chaos, and the remaining mercenaries threw down their weapons and surrender. Areas secure, Ryan reported, dusting himself off as he surveyed the destruction. Eli nodded, his gaze sweeping over the battlefield. Good work, everyone. Let's get back to the barn and regroup. As the team began their trek back, the valley fell quiet once more. The cartel's assault had been repelled, their forces shattered, and their morale broken. But Eli knew the fight wasn't over, not yet. There was still one final confrontation to come, and he intended to be ready. The air in the valley was thick with the lingering scent of smoke and gunpowder as Eli Warren led his team toward the cartel's final command point. They moved with practiced precision, their boots crunching softly against the dirt as they approached the makeshift camp. The cartel's remaining forces were few, but Eli knew Miguel El Diablo Santos would not go down without a fight. Gabe Knox's voice crackled over the radio. I've got eyes on Santos. He's holed up near the center of the camp, armed and surrounded by a handful of his men. Looks like he's making a stand. Hold your position, Eli ordered. We'll flush them out. Zane, keep jamming their comms. We don't need them calling for reinforcements. On it, Zane replied, his fingers flying across his keyboard. They're isolated. Whatever's left of their operation ends here. Eli signaled to Ryan Alvarez, who was crouched beside him with a satchel of explosives. Ryan, get the charges ready. We're taking out their supplies and whatever equipment they've got left. Ryan nodded, slipping into the shadows as he moved toward the vehicles and storage crates scattered around the camp. Eli turned to Maya Clark, her rifle slung over her shoulder, her expression resolute. Maya, take a team and secure the perimeter. No one gets out. Understood, Maya said, signaling for a group of volunteers to follow her. They fanned out, their movements swift and coordinated. Inside the camp, Santos paced near a table covered in maps and radios. Felix Romero stood nearby, his face pale and drawn. They've cut us off, Felix said, his voice shaking. We should retreat while we still can. Santos shot him a sharp glare. Retreat? There's nowhere to run. If we leave this valley now, we'll be hunted down like dogs. No, we finish this here. But, Felix began, only to be silenced by the cold fury in Santos's eyes. No buts. Santos growled. We've come too far to back down now. If they want to fight, we'll give them one. The first explosion rocked the camp, sending flames and debris into the air. Santos spun around, his hand going to his rifle as shouts erupted from his men. They're here, one of the mercenaries yelled, scrambling for cover. Eli and his team moved quickly, taking advantage of the chaos. Gabe picked off the sentries from his position on the ridge, each shot precise and deliberate. Ryan's explosives continued to detonate, targeting the cartel's vehicles and supply caches. Maya and her group cut off the escape routes, her sharp commands keeping the volunteers focused and coordinated. Stay low and watch your corners, she instructed. Don't let them regroup. As the defenders closed in, the remaining cartel forces broke ranks, their confidence shattered. Eli pushed forward, his rifle raised as he advanced toward the center of the camp. He could see Santos ahead, barking orders and firing at anything that moved. Santos, Eli called, his voice cutting through the noise. It's over. Surrender now, and maybe you'll live. Santos turned, his eyes narrowing as he spotted Eli. You think this ends with me? He sneered. You're a fool if you think taking me down will stop what's coming. Maybe not, Eli replied, his tone steady. But it'll stop you. Santos let out a harsh laugh, raising his rifle. Come and try. Phantom. The two men circled each other, the sounds of the battle fading into the background as their focus narrowed. Eli moved with calculated precision, his every step measured as he studied Santos's movements. The cartel leader was strong and experienced, but Eli could see the cracks in his confidence, the desperation lurking behind his bravado. Santos fired first, the shot going wide as Eli ducked behind a crate. He returned fire, forcing Santos to take cover behind an overturned table. The exchange was tense, each man testing the other's resolve. You think you're some kind of hero? Santos taunted, his voice echoing across the camp. You're just a relic, clinging to a fight you already lost. Eli didn't respond, his silence more cutting than any retort. He moved swiftly, flanking Santos and forcing him out of cover. The two men collided, their rifles forgotten as the fight turned to hand-to-hand combat. Santos was strong, his blows heavy and punishing. But Eli was faster, his movements honed by years of experience. He blocked Santos's strikes, countering with precision and force. The two men grappled, the struggle brutal and unrelenting. In a final surge of effort, Eli disarmed Santos, sending the cartel leader's knife skittering across the ground. Santos lunged for it, but Eli was faster, pinning him to the ground with a firm grip. It's over, Eli said, his voice low but resolute. You've lost. Santos glared up at him, his breath ragged. You think killing me will fix this? There's always someone else waiting to take my place. Maybe, Eli replied. But not here. Not in this valley. With one swift motion, Eli struck Santos, knocking him unconscious. He rose to his feet, his chest heaving as he looked around. The camp was in ruins, the cartel's forces defeated. The valley had held. As the dust settled, the team regrouped near the center of the camp. Maya approached Eli, her expression a mix of relief and exhaustion. It's done, she said. They're finished. Eli nodded, his gaze shifting to Santos's unconscious form. For now. Ryan joined them, his face smudged with dirt and sweat. What do we do with him? Turn him over to the authorities, Eli said. Let them deal with what's left of him. Before they could move Santos, he stirred, his eyes fluttering open. A faint, bitter smile crossed his face as he looked up at Eli. You think you've won? He rasped. There's a lab, a hidden operation not far from here. You'll never find it. Eli's expression hardened. Where? Santos chuckled weakly, his voice fading. You'll figure it out, if you're lucky. Eli stood, his mind racing. Santos's words were a reminder that the fight wasn't truly over, that the valley's safety would always be at risk as long as threats like the cartel lingered. The team and the volunteers returned to the barn as the sun climbed higher, its warm light washing over the valley. The mood was somber but victorious, the weight of their triumph tempered by the losses they had endured. Eli addressed the group, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. We stood together. And we won. But this isn't just a victory for today, it's a reminder of what we can do when we fight for what matters. The valley is ours. And it will stay ours. The crowd erupted into cheers, their spirits lifted by Eli's words. As the noise died down, Eli stepped back, his gaze drifting toward the horizon. He knew the battle was won. But the war was far from over. Still, for the first time in a long time, he felt hope, a belief that, no matter what came next, the valley and its people would endure. The valley was unrecognizable from the war-torn landscape it had been just days ago. The physical scars of battle, burned-out vehicles, shattered fences, and cratered earth were slowly being erased by the determined hands of its residents. Neighbors worked side by side, hammering new boards onto homes, clearing debris, and erecting fresh barricades at key points along the valley's perimeter. Every stroke of paint and every swing of a hammer was a testament to their resilience. Eli Warren watched from the edge of the field, his arms crossed as he observed the bustle of activity. A group of younger residents had gathered near the barn, using salvaged materials to reinforce a newly constructed watchtower. Tommy, the young man Eli had mentored during their early training sessions, stood at the base, directing the group with surprising confidence. They're learning fast, Luke Nash said as he approached Eli, wiping sweat from his brow. A couple more weeks, and they might not even need us anymore. They'll need us, Eli replied. But they'll rely on themselves first. That's how it should be. Luke nodded, his gaze following a group of locals as they dragged a felled tree into position to create a natural barrier. Feels good to see them like this, focused, determined. It's a different valley now. The transformation was more than physical. The battle had forged a new identity for the valley, one of unity, self-reliance, and defiance against outside threats. The locals, once divided by fear and uncertainty, now moved with purpose. Farmers and ranchers who had never held a weapon before now patrolled the perimeter with confidence, their radios crackling with steady updates. Maya Clark stood at the center of the activity, her presence a steadying force. She moved between groups, offering guidance and encouragement as they worked. When a group of volunteers struggled to secure a large tarp over a storage shed, she climbed up to help, her hands moving deftly as she tied the ropes. Keep it tight, she said, her voice firm but encouraging. If the wind catches it, we'll have to start over. The volunteers nodded, redoubling their efforts. When the tarp was finally secured, Maya gave them a rare smile. Good work. That'll hold. As she climbed down, a group of women approached her, carrying baskets of food for the workers. One of them, an older woman named Clara, patted Maya on the shoulder. You've done so much for us. Clara said. Her voice warm. We wouldn't have made it through without you. Maya shook her head. Her smile fading slightly. We made it through because we stood together. That's what matters. Eli's team had seamlessly integrated into the valley, each of them finding a role that suited their skills. Gabe Knox had taken over the shooting range, turning it into a training ground for locals who wanted to sharpen their marksmanship. His gruff demeanor and sharp wit made him an effective instructor. And the range was rarely empty. Breathe. Gabe instructed a young woman as she lined up her shot. Relax your shoulders. Don't rush it. The woman exhaled slowly, her finger tightening on the trigger. The shot rang out. And the target, a metal plate hanging from a tree, swung with a satisfying clang. Not bad, Gabe said with a rare smile. Now do it again. Ryan Alvarez, meanwhile, had thrown himself into upgrading the valley's defenses. He worked tirelessly in his workshop, designing more advanced traps and fortifications. Locals often stopped by to watch him work, their curiosity piqued by his ingenuity. Don't touch that, Ryan said without looking up as a teenage boy reached for a half-assembled device. Unless you want to lose a finger. The boy quickly pulled his hand back. But Ryan's tone softened as he added, if you want to learn, grab those pliers. I'll show you how this works. Zane Carter had transformed the radio station into a fully functional surveillance and communication hub. He spent most of his time monitoring the valley's perimeter through an array of cameras and sensors. But he also found time to teach locals how to use the equipment. This isn't just about watching for trouble, Zane explained to a group of volunteers. It's about staying connected. The more we communicate, the stronger we are. Luke Nash had taken over the clinic, using his medical expertise to care for the community. He treated everything from minor scrapes to more serious injuries sustained during the battle, his calm demeanor putting patients at ease. You're going to be fine, Luke told a rancher as he wrapped a bandage around the man's arm. Just take it easy for a few days. And next time, don't try to wrestle a barbed wire fence. The man chuckled, wincing slightly. I'll keep that in mind. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the community gathered in the center of town for a celebration. The mood was light. The weight of the recent battle momentarily lifted. Tables were laden with food, and laughter filled the air as children darted between groups of adults, their energy infectious. Maya stood near the front of the gathering, a microphone in her hand. When the crowd quieted, she took a deep breath and began to speak. A few weeks ago, this valley was on the brink of collapse. We were scared, divided, and unsure of our future. But tonight, we stand together, stronger than we've ever been. Her words were met with cheers. And Maya smiled, her confidence growing. This victory wasn't just about beating the cartel. It was about proving to ourselves that we're capable of more than we ever imagined. We've built something here, a community that won't back down, no matter what. The applause was deafening, and Maya stepped back, handing the microphone to Clara, who began leading the crowd in a song. As the music swelled, Eli stood at the edge of the gathering, his arms crossed as he watched the celebration. They love you. You know, Luke said, stepping up beside him. Even if you don't want to admit it. Eli shrugged, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. They don't need to love me. They just need to believe in themselves. They do, Luke said. But they believe in you, too. Eli didn't respond, his gaze fixed on the crowd. For the first time in years, he felt something close to peace. It was a fleeting feeling, but in that moment, it was enough. The morning after the celebration, the valley was quiet. the buzz of activity from rebuilding replaced by a calm stillness. Eli Warren stood on the porch of the farmhouse, his hand resting lightly on the railing. Ranger sat at his feet, his ears perked up at every sound in the distance. Though the threat of the cartel had been neutralized, Eli's instincts refused to let him relax entirely. A faint rumble of tires on gravel caught his attention. Eli's sharp eyes shifted toward the approaching vehicle, a familiar sheriff's cruiser rolling up the dirt driveway. Sheriff Mark Cooper stepped out, adjusting his hat and offering a nod of greeting. Eli remained still, watching as the sheriff approached. "Morning, Eli," Cooper said, his tone neutral but respectful. "Thought I'd stop by and see how you're holding up." "Morning, Sheriff," Eli replied, stepping down from the porch. "What can I do for you?" Cooper paused, his hands resting on his hips. "Figured it was time to have a chat. This valley owes you and your team a lot. More than most of them will ever realize. You didn't just help us fight, you showed us how to stand up for ourselves." Eli inclined his head slightly. "They did the hard part. We just gave them a push." Cooper chuckled. "Modest, as always. But you and I both know this wasn't your first time handling something like this." He looked at Eli, his gaze probing but not confrontational. "I've seen a lot in my years, but nothing like what you pulled off here. You've got a background that doesn't fit with the quiet farmer you pretend to be." Eli's expression remained unreadable. "Does it matter?" Cooper considered the question, then shook his head. "No. I suppose it doesn't. What matters is what you've done here. Just know you've got my respect, even if I can't put all the pieces together." Eli nodded, appreciating the sheriff's pragmatism. "Thanks, Cooper. That means something." Cooper tipped his hat. "I'll leave it at that. Just know, if you ever need anything, you've got an ally in me." As the sheriff climbed back into his cruiser and drove off, Eli let out a small breath. He respected Cooper's restraint. It wasn't often someone in his position chose to leave questions unanswered. But then again, the valley was full of surprises. Later that afternoon, another visitor arrived, this time in a sleek black SUV. Eli recognized the vehicle immediately and met Agent Sofia Martinez halfway up the driveway. The FBI agent stepped out, her sharp eyes scanning the surroundings before settling on Eli. "Agent Martinez," Eli said, his tone neutral. "Didn't think we'd see you again so soon." Martinez crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. "I had to see it for myself. The reports don't do this place justice." Eli remained silent, letting her take in the sight of the valley, the repaired homes, the fortified defenses, and the people working together with a newfound sense of purpose. "This isn't the kind of transformation that happens overnight," Martinez said finally. "Or without a lot of help from someone who knows what they're doing." Eli met her gaze, his face calm but resolute. "The people here did the work. We just showed them how to fight for what's theirs." Martinez's lips quirked into a faint smile. Spoken like a man who's spent his life fighting battles no one talks about. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "I've seen enough to know you're not just a farmer, Eli. The way you and your team operated, it's not something you pick up fixing fences and plowing fields." Eli didn't flinch, his tone steady. "Does it matter, Agent?" Martinez studied him for a long moment, then shook her head. "No, it doesn't. What matters is that this valley is standing because of you. And for what it's worth, you've got my respect." Eli nodded slightly. "Appreciate it." Martinez turned to leave but paused, glancing over her shoulder. "Just one thing, if there's ever another fight, I hope you'll let me know. You've got a way of getting things done. And people like you, we could use more of that. Eli didn't respond. And Martinez didn't press him. She climbed into her SUV and drove away, leaving Eli to watch the dust settle in her wake. As evening fell, the valley grew quiet once more. Eli stood near the edge of the barn, looking out over the land he had come to call home. The fields stretched out before him, bathed in the soft orange glow of the setting sun. Ranger sat at his side, his tail wagging lazily as he rested his head on Eli's boot. Eli's mind wandered, replaying the events of the past few weeks. The battles, the sacrifices, and the moments of triumph, they all weighed heavily on him. A reminder of the price that came with protecting what mattered. He thought of the people they had lost, the scars left behind, and the resilience of the community that had emerged stronger than ever. You did good, boy, Eli said softly, reaching down to scratch Ranger behind the ears. The dog let out a contented huff, leaning into the touch. For the first time in years, Eli allowed himself a moment of peace. The valley was safe. The people were united. And for now, there was no immediate threat on the horizon. But deep down, Eli knew better than to let his guard down completely. As the first rays of dawn broke over the mountains, Eli stood alone on the ridge, watching the sunrise. The light painted the valley in shades of gold and amber, a stark contrast to the darkness it had endured. It was a new day, full of promise and uncertainty. Ranger's ears perked up suddenly, and the dog let out a low growl before barking sharply. Eli tensed, his hand instinctively going to the rifle slung over his shoulder. He scanned the horizon, his sharp eyes narrowing as he spotted a lone figure approaching in the distance. The figure was too far away to make out clearly, but their steady stride and deliberate movements set Eli on edge. Whoever they weren't from the valley, and they weren't in a hurry to announce their presence. Eli glanced down at Ranger, who had stopped barking but remained alert, his body taut with anticipation. Looks like we've got company, Eli muttered. As the figure drew closer, Eli's mind raced with possibilities. Friend or foe? A stranger passing through? Or a harbinger of something more? He didn't have the answers. But one thing was certain, peace was never guaranteed. And the fight to protect the valley was far from over. Eli stood tall, his silhouette framed by the rising sun, and waited. Just when Eli thought the valley was safe, Ranger's bark signaled a new challenge in the distance. What do you think is coming next? Drop your theories in the comments, we'd love to hear them. Share your thoughts in this story with others. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.